Adrian Vale ruled New York's underworld with calculated cruelty, until one night he met a woman who refused to play the game. Lena Brooks, a florist with secrets darker than his own, became the only thing he couldn't control. Their reckless night together ignited an obsession that would dismantle empires and expose bloodlines neither expected. When love collides with power, someone always bleeds. But what if the most dangerous choice isn't revenge, it's restraint? If you're ready for a story where love demands transformation, not domination, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The chandelier above Adrian Vale's head cost more than most people earned in a decade, but he barely noticed it. Crystal light fractured across the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, illuminating Manhattan's elite in their designer armor, silk gowns that whispered secrets, tuxedos that concealed sins. Politicians laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Businessmen clinked glasses over deals that would ruin families. Women draped themselves across men who'd forget their names by morning. Adrian stood at the edge of it all, a predator surveying prey he had no interest in hunting. "You look bored," Marcus Chen said, appearing at his shoulder with 2 glasses of scotch. Adrian's closest enforcer, the only man he trusted with both his secrets and his silence, handed him one without waiting for confirmation. "I am bored." Adrian accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Remind me why I'm here?" "Because Senator Whitmore expects your support for his infrastructure bill, and your absence would have been noticed." Marcus took a careful sip. "Besides, you own half the people in this room. Might as well see your investments." Adrian's mouth curved, but the expression held no warmth. At 34, he'd built an empire that most people didn't know existed. Legitimate businesses that laundered money, political connections that buried investigations, and a network of loyal soldiers who understood that betrayal meant disappearing without a trace. He dressed in custom Tom Ford, drove cars that cost 6 figures, and commanded rooms without raising his voice. Power was his language, and fear was his currency. "Adrian Vale!" Senator Whitmore's voice boomed across the ballroom, cutting through chamber music and polite conversation. The man approached with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, his hand already extended. "I was beginning to think you'd stand me up." Adrian shook the offered hand with precisely calibrated pressure, enough to acknowledge the gesture, not enough to suggest submission. "Senator, your wife looks lovely tonight." Mrs. Whitmore, standing just behind her husband, preened at the compliment. She didn't know that Adrian had photographs of the senator with his mistress, insurance he'd never need to use because Whitmore understood the unspoken contract between them. "We should talk about the vote next week," Whitmore said, lowering his voice as if they were discussing something confidential rather than the predetermined outcome Adrian had already purchased. "There's been some pushback from—" "It'll pass." Adrian's tone left no room for doubt. "You have the votes." Of course, of course." Whitmore's laugh was too hearty, too desperate. "Still, perhaps we could discuss—" "Marcus will handle the details." Adrian glanced at his enforcer, who nodded once. "If you'll excuse me, Senator." He walked away before Whitmore could protest, cutting through the crowd with the fluid confidence of someone who'd never been denied access to anything. People parted without thinking, an unconscious acknowledgement of the authority he carried like a second skin. The ballroom's French doors stood open, leading to a terrace that overlooked the city. Adrian stepped into the October night, trading orchestral strings for the distant symphony of traffic and sirens. Cool air cut through the stuffiness of wealth and pretension. Finally, he could breathe. He'd give it 20 more minutes, he decided. Show his face, remind the right people of his presence, then disappear into the night the way he preferred, alone, unencumbered, free from the performance these events demanded. The door opened behind him. Adrian didn't turn, assuming Marcus had followed to discuss logistics or threats that needed addressing. But the footsteps were too light, too uncertain. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was out here." The voice made him turn. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the ballroom's golden glow. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost a fraction of what the other women had spent. Her dark hair pulled back in a style more practical than fashionable. No jewelry except small pearl earrings. No makeup except what enhanced rather than transformed. She looked completely, utterly out of place. and that's exactly what made Adrian notice her. "The terrace is big enough for two," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that made refusal seem impossible. She hesitated, her hand still on the door. In that pause, Adrian studied her more carefully. Mid-20s, he guessed, olive skin that suggested Mediterranean ancestry, dark eyes that held intelligence and something else, wariness maybe, or the exhaustion of someone who didn't belong in rooms like this but had learned to navigate them anyway. "I really should get back," she said finally. "I'm supposed to be working." "Working?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. She didn't have the polished presentation of the event staff he'd seen circulating with champagne trays. "Doing what?" "The floral arrangements." She gestured vaguely toward the ballroom. "I own a small shop in Brooklyn. The hotel contracts me sometimes for events." A florist. Adrian almost smiled. In a room full of people performing power and influence, she was probably the only one present who'd actually created something with her own hands. "Then you've already done your job," he said. "The arrangements are beautiful. You've earned a break." She studied him with those dark eyes, clearly trying to determine if this was an invitation or a command. Adrian wondered what conclusion she'd reach, what instinct would guide her decision. After a moment, she stepped fully onto the terrace, letting the door close behind her but maintaining careful distance between them. "Thank you," she said, "though I'm not sure beautiful is the word most people use for flowers at events like this. Expensive is more common." Adrian's mouth curved into something almost resembling a genuine smile. "You don't think they're beautiful?" "I think they're appropriate." She moved to the terrace railing, looking out over the city with the kind of appreciation that suggested she didn't often get views like this. White orchids and calla lilies, elegant, sophisticated, completely impersonal. They say, "We have money and taste," without saying anything real. And what would you choose? If the assignment was to say something real? She glanced at him, surprised he was continuing the conversation. "That would depend on what needed to be said." "Pretend I'm a client." Adrian moved closer, closing some of the distance between them, but not enough to crowd her space. "What would you choose for me?" "I don't know anything about you." "Then observe." He spread his hands, offering himself for evaluation. "Tell me what you see." She shouldn't engage, he could tell. Every instinct she possessed was probably screaming at her to excuse herself, to return to the safety of the ballroom where other people existed and witnesses mattered. But curiosity won, the way it often did with intelligent people who couldn't resist a challenge. Her gaze traveled over him, not the way women usually looked at Adrian Vale with calculation or desire or fear, but with genuine assessment. She studied his face, his posture, the expensive suit that had been tailored to his exact measurements. "Dark calla lilies," she said finally. "Almost black, but not quite. With silver-green eucalyptus and deep burgundy roses. Elegant, but dangerous. Beautiful, but with thorns." The accuracy of it hit Adrian like a physical blow. She'd seen through the performance to the truth underneath, and she'd done it in seconds. "You're good at reading people," he said quietly. "I'm good at reading flowers." She turned back to the city view, her expression suggesting she regretted revealing so much. "People just choose them." "And what would you choose for yourself?" "Wild flowers." The answer came immediately, without thought. "Whatever grows naturally, without cultivation or control. Things that thrive because they're supposed to, not because someone forced them to." Adrian understood the metaphor, the yearning beneath her words. She wanted freedom from expectations, from the performance these events demanded, from the careful curation required to survive in spaces where she didn't belong. "I'm Adrian," he said, offering his name like an invitation. She hesitated again, and in that pause he knew she'd recognized him. Not from personal interaction, they'd never met, but from reputation, from the whispers that followed him through rooms like this. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, that wariness in her eyes sharpening into something more intentional. She knew enough to be careful. "Good." "Lena," she said finally. "Lena Brooks." "It's a pleasure, Lena Brooks." He extended his hand, curious if she'd take it. She did, her grip firm despite the hesitation. Her hands were exactly what he'd expected. Not soft and manicured like the women inside, but strong, with calluses that spoke of real work, soil under the nails she'd tried to scrub clean, the hands of someone who created things. Adrian held her hand a beat longer than necessary, watching color rise in her cheeks before she pulled away. "I really should get back," she said, but she didn't move. "Should you?" Adrian leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral, probably chosen because it was expected rather than because she loved it. Or are you just performing the exit everyone expects? Lena turned to look at him fully, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. "Are you always this direct with strangers?" "Only the interesting ones." "And I'm interesting?" "You told me I was dangerous and beautiful with thorns," Adrian said. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her despite her obvious desire to maintain distance. The sound did something strange to Adrian's chest, a tightness he couldn't quite name. "Most people probably don't appreciate that kind of honesty," Lena said. "Most people bore me." "And I don't?" "Not yet." He shifted his position, angling his body toward hers in a way that created intimacy without demanding it. "Tell me about your shop. Where in Brooklyn?" "Sunset Park." Pride crept into her voice despite her attempt to sound casual. "It's small, just me and one part-time assistant, but it's mine." "What made you want to work with flowers?" "They don't lie." The answer came quickly, unrehearsed. "A rose is a rose. It blooms or it doesn't. It lives or it dies. There's honesty in that. Unlike people." "Unlike most people," she agreed. "We're all performing something, playing roles we think we're supposed to play." "And what role are you playing tonight, Lena Brooks?" She considered the question seriously, her gaze drifting back to the ballroom visible through the glass doors. The grateful small business owner who's honored to be here. The professional who knows her place. The woman who smiles and says, "Yes, of course," when the hotel calls for last-minute arrangements at premium rates. "And who are you when you're not playing that role?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to surprise her. "I've been playing it for so long, I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." Adrian understood that better than he could articulate. He'd built his entire life on performance. The civilized businessman who attended charity galas, the ruthless operator who commanded criminal enterprises, the untouchable force who made people disappear. The masks had become so practiced that he sometimes forgot which one was real, if any of them were. "I think you know exactly who you are," he said. "You're just afraid of what happens if you show it." Lena's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the railing. "That's presumptuous for someone who's known me for 10 minutes. Then prove me wrong. Tell me I'm mistaken." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of the city and the muffled orchestral music from inside. Adrian waited, giving her space to retreat or advance, curious which she'd choose. "Why do you care?" she asked finally. "Because you're real," Adrian said simply. "And everything in there," he gestured toward the ballroom, "is performance, strategy, transaction. You're the first genuine thing I've encountered in months. You don't know that. I could be performing too." "You could be." He studied her face, the way she held herself, the honesty in her eyes even as she tried to maintain distance. "But you're not. That's what makes you dangerous." "I'm dangerous?" Lena laughed again, but this time it held an edge. "I sell flowers in Brooklyn. You're—" She stopped herself, seeming to remember who she was talking to. "I'm what?" Adrian's voice went soft, inviting confession. "Someone I should probably stay away from." She said it without judgment, just fact. "People like me don't usually end up in good situations when we get too close to people like you." The observation was accurate, intelligent, self-protective. Everything about Lena Brooks suggested she made careful choices, calculated risks, smart decisions about who deserved her trust and who didn't. Adrian should respect that, should let her walk away, return to her simple life selling flowers to people who didn't appreciate their meaning. Should forget this conversation and this woman who'd seen through his carefully constructed facade in minutes. But he'd spent his entire life making smart decisions, and tonight, just this once, he wanted to make a reckless one. "You're right," he said. "You should stay away from me. I'm exactly as dangerous as you think I am, probably more. Everything cautious and self-protective in you is correct to keep distance between us. Then why are we still talking? Because despite knowing better, you haven't left yet. Adrian held her gaze, letting her see the truth in his eyes. And despite knowing better, I don't want you to. The air between them changed, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Lena's pulse beat visibly at her throat, her breathing just slightly elevated. She was afraid, not of physical harm, but of something more fundamental. Of wanting something she shouldn't, of making a choice that would change things she'd worked hard to build. Adrian recognized that fear. He lived with it every day. The constant calculation of risk versus reward, safety versus desire. The known quantity versus the dangerous unknown. I don't do this, Lena said quietly. I don't meet men at parties, and she stopped, color flooding her cheeks. I don't know what I'm saying. You're saying you're tempted by something you know is a bad idea. Adrian moved closer, close enough that he could feel the heat of her skin, smell the subtle sweetness of her perfume beneath the floral notes. You're saying that despite every intelligent instinct telling you to walk away, part of you wants to see what happens if you stay. That's insane. Probably. He reached up slowly, giving her time to retreat, and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but she shivered at the contact. But sanity is overrated. Easy for you to say. Her voice wavered between resistance and surrender. You have power, resources, protection. People like me don't get second chances when we make stupid choices. Then don't think of it as a choice. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, achingly gentle. Think of it as just tonight, just this moment. Just two people who found something real in a room full of performance. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you go back to your shop in Sunset Park. You arrange flowers for people who don't appreciate them. You build your business and your life exactly the way you planned. His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her gaze with an intensity that made breathing difficult. But tonight, just tonight, you can be someone who isn't careful, someone who takes what she wants instead of what's safe. Lena's hands came up to grip his wrists, but she didn't push him away. Her eyes searched his face, looking for lies or manipulation or the danger she knew existed but couldn't quite define. Why me? She whispered. You could have anyone in that ballroom. Women who are beautiful, sophisticated, who understand your world. They bore me, Adrian interrupted. They want what I represent, not who I am. They perform desire because they think it's expected. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, watching her eyes darken with want she couldn't quite hide. You're not performing anything. This, he pressed his palm against her racing heartbeat, is real. Your fear is real. Your desire is real. That's what I want. This is crazy, she breathed. Yes. I don't even know you. No. I should leave, right now. Walk away and forget this conversation happened. You should. Adrian leaned closer, his mouth hovering just above hers, close enough that their breath mingled but not quite touching. Are you going to? The question hung between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond a single kiss. This was the moment of choice, the point where Lena Brooks could protect herself from the danger Adrian represented and the chaos that inevitably followed him. This was her chance to be smart, to be safe, to choose the life she'd carefully built over the reckless unknown. She closed the distance between them instead, rising on her toes to press her mouth to his with a desperation that matched the wildness beating in his chest. The kiss ignited something primal and dangerous in Adrian, a hunger he'd spent years controlling and calculating suddenly unleashed by the feel of her lips, the taste of her mouth, the way she gripped his suit jacket like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted off its axis. He'd intended to be gentle, to ease her into this with the practiced seduction that had never failed him. But Lena kissed him like she was drowning, and he was air, like she'd been starving for something real and had finally found it, and his control shattered under the onslaught of her unexpected passion. His hands tangled in her hair, destroying the careful style she'd constructed. Her fingers dug into his shoulders hard enough to bruise. The kiss deepened, turned savage, became something neither of them could control or contain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers and tried to remember why control mattered, why calculation was important, why he'd built his entire life on thinking 10 steps ahead of everyone else. "Come with me," he said, his voice rough with want and something darker. "Right now, leave this place. Let me show you what happens when you stop being careful." Lena pulled back just far enough to meet his eyes. Hers were wide, pupils blown with desire and fear and reckless decision. "Where? Does it matter?" "It should. But does it?" She laughed, the sound shaky and breathless. "No, it doesn't." Adrian took her hand, threading their fingers together with a possessiveness that should have terrified them both. "Then let's stop thinking and start doing." He led her through the terrace door back into the ballroom, not bothering to acknowledge the stares that followed them, the florist from Brooklyn and the criminal kingpin leaving together in full view of Manhattan's elite. Marcus caught his eye from across the room, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Adrian shook his head once. Not tonight. Whatever business needed handling could wait until morning. They took the service elevator down to avoid the crowd in the lobby, neither speaking as the floors counted down and tension built between them like a living thing. Adrian's town car waited at the curb, his driver standing at attention until he waved the man off. "I'll drive," he said, opening the passenger door for Lena. "Get in." She hesitated one final time, her hand on the door frame, her eyes searching his face for something. Reassurance, maybe, or permission to make this choice without regret. "Last chance," Adrian said quietly. "Walk away now, and we both forget this happened. No consequences, no complications. Just a conversation on a terrace that didn't mean anything. And if I get in? Then I take you somewhere private, and we stop pretending either of us wants to be careful." Lena looked at the open car door, then back at the hotel where her van was parked, where her safe, predictable life waited for her to return to it. Adrian could see the war playing out in her expression, sense versus desire, safety versus recklessness, the known versus the dangerous unknown. She got in the car. Adrian closed the door with careful control, then moved around to the driver's side. His hands were steady as he started the engine, his movements precise as he pulled into traffic. But inside, something wild and unfamiliar was tearing through his carefully constructed defenses, demanding more than he'd ever allowed himself to want. They drove in silence through Manhattan streets, still alive with Friday night energy. Adrian's penthouse was in Tribeca, a fortress of luxury and security where he could control every variable, monitor every threat, maintain the absolute authority he required to survive in his world. He didn't take her there. Instead, he drove to a small boutique hotel in the West Village, the kind of place that catered to wealthy tourists seeking authentic New York experiences without sacrificing comfort. Anonymous, private, temporary. The night manager recognized him. Everyone in hospitality knew Adrian Vale by sight, if not by name, and produced a keycard without asking questions, without requiring identification or credit cards or any of the usual protocols. Money and power made everything simple. Adrian led Lena to a suite on the top floor, his hand at the small of her back, feeling her tremble with anticipation, or fear, or both. He unlocked the door, held it open, gave her one last opportunity to change her mind. She stepped inside without hesitation. The suite was tastefully decorated in neutral tones, more subtle than his own place, but comfortable enough. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, lights sparkling like promises they'd both probably regret making. Adrian closed the door and turned to find Lena standing in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, suddenly unsure now that they were alone with nothing between them but intention and desire. "We don't have to do this," he said, meaning it, despite the want clawing through his chest. "I can take you home right now. Your van is still at the hotel. I'll have someone drive it to your shop in the morning." "Why would you do that?" She turned to face him, genuinely curious. "You got me here. Why give me an out?" "Because I want you willing, not coerced." Adrian moved closer but didn't touch her, giving her space to think clearly. "I want you to choose this knowing exactly what it is. One night that doesn't mean anything beyond what we make it mean. No promises, no future, no fantasy of something more. Just honest desire between two people who found each other at the right moment." Lena studied his face, seeing the truth beneath his careful words. You do this often? Bring women to anonymous hotels for nights that don't mean anything? No. The admission surprised him with its honesty. I don't usually want anything beyond what's strategic or necessary. People are transactions in my world, means to ends. But you, he stopped, unsure how to articulate the difference. You're not a transaction. Then what am I? A mistake I want to make. His mouth curved into something almost like a real smile. A reckless choice that will probably complicate things I've worked hard to keep simple. The first genuine impulse I've followed in years. That's not exactly romantic. I'm not a romantic man, Lena. I'm dangerous, calculating, and everything in your life will be easier if you walk away from me right now. He held her gaze, letting her see the truth. But if you stay, I promise to give you something real. Not flowers that lie about being beautiful. Not performance or strategy or careful calculation, just want and hunger and honesty for as long as tonight lasts. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, rising on her toes to kiss him with the same desperate hunger that had ignited on the terrace. Adrian caught her, lifting her against him, walking them backward until her spine met the wall and he could cage her there with his body. Tell me what you want, he demanded against her mouth, his hands already working the zipper of her dress. Say it out loud. You, Lena gasped as his mouth found the pulse at her throat. Just you. Just this. Just... Her words dissolved into a moan as his teeth scraped her skin, marking her in ways that would show tomorrow. Adrian pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his hands framing her face with surprising gentleness, despite the savage want coursing through him. Are you sure? Stop asking me that, she said, her fingers working the buttons of his shirt with shaking hands. Stop giving me chances to be smart. I don't want to be smart tonight. What do you want? To feel something real. Her hand slid over his bare chest, exploring with tentative confidence. To choose something just because I want it, not because it's safe or expected or right. Adrian captured her hands, pressing them above her head with one of his own, using his free hand to slide her dress down her shoulders until it pooled at her feet. She stood before him in simple black underwear that matched her earlier description, practical rather than seductive, honest rather than performed. Perfect. You're beautiful, he said, and meant it in ways he hadn't meant those words in years. Color flooded her cheeks. You don't have to... I don't say things I don't mean. He released her hands to trace the line of her collarbone down between her breasts, across her ribcage with achingly gentle touches that made her shiver. Every word I speak to you is truth. That's what you asked for, isn't it? Something real? Yes, she breathed. Then believe me when I tell you that you're exquisite, that I've wanted you since you stood in that doorway looking lost and out of place. That this, he pressed his palm against her racing heart, is the most honest thing I've felt in longer than I can remember. Lena's hands came up to frame his face, her dark eyes searching his with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be reckless, make stupid choices, want things I shouldn't have. Her thumb traced his lower lip, the gesture achingly tender. I've spent my entire life being careful, playing it safe, choosing security over desire. I don't know how to just let go. Adrian turned his head to press a kiss into her palm, then her wrist, following the line of her pulse up her arm. Then let me teach you, he murmured against her skin. Let me show you what happens when you stop controlling everything and just feel. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed with the kind of careful strength that suggested violence held in check. Laid her down on cool sheets and stood back to look at her. Dark hair spread across white pillows, olive skin flushed with want, eyes wide with anticipation and trust she probably shouldn't feel. She was giving him something precious, Adrian realized. Not just her body, but her abandon, her trust, her willingness to be vulnerable with someone who could hurt her in ways she couldn't even imagine. The weight of that gift should have sent him running, should have triggered every self-protective instinct he'd honed over years of survival in a world that punished weakness. Instead, it made him want to worship her. He shed his remaining clothes with efficient movements, watching her gaze travel over him with undisguised interest. Then he joined her on the bed, covering her body with his, feeling her soft curves yield to his harder planes. "Look at me," he commanded when her eyes started to drift closed. "I want you present for this. Fully conscious of every choice you're making, every sensation you're feeling. This isn't something that's happening to you. It's something you're choosing. Understand?" Lena nodded, her hands sliding up his arms to grip his shoulders. "I understand." "Good." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, tasting her mouth until she was pliant and wanting beneath him. "Now tell me what you need." "I don't know," she admitted against his lips. "Show me." So he did. With hands and mouth and whispered commands, Adrian mapped every inch of her skin, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch, what made her grip his hair and beg for more. He took his time despite the urgency clawing through him, building her pleasure with patient intensity until she was trembling and desperate beneath him. "Please," Lena finally whispered, her nails digging into his back. "Adrian, please." "Please what?" He kissed her throat, her collarbone, the space between her breasts. "Tell me what you want." "You. Inside me. Now." He should have prepared her better, should have taken more time, should have made absolutely certain she was ready. But the desperate need in her voice shredded his control, and he positioned himself at her entrance, meeting her eyes as he began to push forward. The resistance stopped him immediately. Adrian froze, his entire body going rigid as realization crashed through him like ice water. "Lena," he said carefully, his voice strained with the effort of holding still. "Have you done this before?" She went scarlet, turning her face away. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Yes, it fucking matters. If this is your first time, I wanted it to be with someone who made me feel something real," she interrupted, her voice fierce despite her embarrassment. "Someone who saw me instead of what I could give them. Someone who didn't want to own me or fix me or save me. Just someone who wanted me for exactly who I am, just for tonight." The confession hit Adrian with unexpected force. She'd chosen him, not despite knowing he was dangerous, but because of it. Because he'd been honest about what this was and what it wasn't. Because he'd given her the truth when everyone else in her life had probably offered pretty lies. "If I do this," he said quietly, "there's no taking it back. You understand that. There's no undoing it." "I know." Her hands cupped his face with startling tenderness. "I'm choosing this, Adrian. I'm choosing you. Please don't make me regret it by treating me like I can't make my own decisions." He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring everything he couldn't say into the connection between them. Then, watching her face, he pressed forward carefully, giving her body time to adjust, to accept him despite the initial resistance. Lena's breath caught, her fingers tightening on his shoulders as pain flickered across her expression. Adrian stopped again, pressing his forehead to hers, breathing hard with the effort of maintaining control when everything in him screamed to move, to claim, to take what she was offering. "Breathe," he commanded gently. "Just breathe through it. The pain won't last." She did as he instructed, her body gradually relaxing around him until he could move again, pushing deeper with excruciating care. When he was finally fully seated inside her, they both stilled, adapting to the overwhelming intimacy of the connection. "Okay?" Adrian asked, his voice rough with restrained need. "Yes," Lena whispered. "More than okay. Move. Please, move." He did, setting a slow rhythm that built pleasure in gradual waves, watching her face transform as pain gave way to sensation and sensation gave way to building pleasure. Her hands roamed his back, his shoulders, his hair, touching him with growing confidence as her body learned the rhythm. Adrian had been with countless women, but this felt different. Raw, genuine, like something fundamental had shifted in the universe and nothing would ever be quite the same again. He tried to push the thought away, to focus on physical sensation rather than emotional connection, but Lena kept pulling him back with the way she said his name, the way she met his eyes, the way she touched him like he mattered beyond what he could provide. When her pleasure began to crest, he felt it building in the tension of her muscles, heard it in her increasingly desperate breathing. Adrian shifted his angle, hitting the spot that made her cry out, and drove her over the edge with deliberate intensity. Lena shattered beneath him, her body clenching around his as pleasure crashed through her in visible waves. The sight and feel of her climax triggered his own, and Adrian buried himself deep as his control finally snapped, his release overwhelming in its intensity. For long moments afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, neither willing to break the connection quite yet. Adrian pressed his face into the curve of her neck, inhaling the scent of her skin mixed with sex and satisfaction. This should have been enough. One night, one connection, one honest exchange before they both returned to their separate lives. That's what he'd promised her, what he'd promised himself. But even as Lena's breathing evened out and sleep began to claim her, Adrian knew with absolute certainty that one night would never be enough. That something had shifted fundamentally in the careful architecture of his life, and there was no going back to the controlled distance he'd maintained from everything and everyone. He'd made a mistake tonight, not in choosing Lena, but in thinking he could walk away from her without consequences. That realization should have terrified him. Instead, watching her sleep in the silver city light filtering through the windows, Adrian felt something far more dangerous than fear. He felt possessive, protective, desperate to keep this woman safe from a world that would destroy her, especially the world he'd built with violence and blood and ruthless calculation. Lena Brooks had been untouched before tonight, innocent in ways that extended far beyond physical experience. And he'd just claimed her, marked her, made her his in ways neither of them had fully understood. The smart thing would be to let her go. To wake her in the morning, take her back to her van, give her some excuse about why this couldn't continue. To protect her from the darkness that followed him like a shadow. But Adrian Vale hadn't built an empire by making smart choices when his survival depended on ruthless ones. And now, watching this woman sleep after trusting him with something precious, he knew he was going to make another reckless choice. He was going to keep her. Dawn crept through the windows like an unwelcome truth. Adrian had been awake for hours, watching Lena sleep with an intensity that would have alarmed him if he'd allowed himself to think about it too deeply. Instead, he'd spent the dark hours cataloging details, the way her lashes curved against her cheeks, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the small bruise forming on her collarbone where his mouth had been too demanding, evidence of what he'd taken, what she'd given. When her eyes finally opened, confusion flickered across her face before memory returned. She went still, her gaze finding his in the gray morning light. "Hi," she said softly, pulling the sheet higher despite the intimacy they had already shared. "Hi." Adrian's voice came out rougher than intended. He'd been rehearsing what to say, how to handle the morning after with the same calculated precision he applied to everything. But now, looking at her vulnerable and uncertain in his borrowed bed, the practiced words dissolved. "What time is it?" Lena asked, already shifting toward the edge of the mattress, preparing to flee. "Early, 6:30. He caught her wrist gently, stopping her retreat. "We should talk." "About what?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. "You were very clear last night. One night, no promises, no expectations. I understood the terms." "Did you?" Adrian sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist. "Because I'm not sure I did." Lena finally looked at him, wariness replacing the softness that had been there moments before. What does that mean? He should let her go, should maintain the boundaries he'd established, protect her from the complications that inevitably followed him. But the words that came out were different from what he'd planned. "It means you were untouched before last night," Adrian said quietly. "It means you gave me something I didn't know you were giving, and now I—" He stopped, frustrated by his inability to articulate the tangle of possession and protection churning through him. "I need to know you're all right," color flooded her cheeks. "I'm fine. A little sore, but fine. We don't need to make this into something it wasn't." "And what was it?" "What you said it would be." Lena pulled her wrist free and slid out of bed, gathering her scattered clothes with jerky movements. "One night, a reckless choice, something that doesn't mean anything beyond what we made it mean." Adrian watched her dress with her back to him, hiding vulnerability beneath practical actions. Everything about her posture screamed retreat, self-protection, the careful distance of someone who'd made a mistake and was now trying to minimize the damage. He should let her maintain that fiction, should let her believe last night was forgettable, meaningless, easy to walk away from. "What's your address?" he asked instead. Lena's hand stilled on her zipper. Why? Because I'm taking you home. Adrian stood, reaching for his own clothes. And because I want to know where to find you. Adrian, what's your address, Lena? He kept his voice level, but command bled through anyway. She rattled off a street number in Sunset Park, then turned to face him with her chin raised. But you don't need to take me anywhere. I can get an Uber back to the hotel, pick up my van. I'm taking you home, he repeated, pulling on his shirt with efficient movements. That's not negotiable. You don't get to decide what's negotiable for me. Fire sparked in her eyes, chasing away the uncertainty. Last night doesn't give you ownership of my choices. The observation was accurate, intelligent, and exactly what he needed to hear to confirm what he already suspected. Lena Brooks had walls he'd barely scratched the surface of, and she'd defend them fiercely. Good. He'd never been interested in easy conquests. You're right, Adrian said, buttoning his cuffs with practiced precision. Last night gives me nothing except the knowledge that I was your first, and that means something whether you want it to or not. So I'm going to drive you home like someone who gives a damn about your safety, and you're going to let me because somewhere under that defensive posture, you know I'm right. Lena stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Then she grabbed her shoes and headed for the door without another word. The drive to Sunset Park happened in loaded silence. Adrian navigated morning traffic with the same controlled efficiency he applied to everything, hyper-aware of Lena's presence in the passenger seat, the way she kept her arms wrapped around herself, the careful distance she maintained, the quick glances she threw his way when she thought he wasn't looking. When he pulled up outside her building, a modest brownstone that had been divided into apartments, Lena reached for the door handle immediately. Wait. Adrian pulled a business card from his wallet and held it out. My number. She didn't take it. Why would I need that? In case you're not fine, in case there are consequences we didn't plan for, in case… He stopped, the truth too raw to voice. In case you want to see me again. In case last night wasn't enough for you either. In case I'm not the only one who can't stop thinking about what happened between us. In case what? Lena prompted. Adrian set the card on the dashboard between them. In case you change your mind about it, meaning nothing. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the card, studying it like it might bite. And if I don't? Change my mind, I mean. Then you don't call, and we both move on with our lives. He said it easily, like it was that simple. Like he wasn't already calculating how to find her again if she chose distance. But keep the number anyway, just in case. Lena tucked the card into her purse, then met his eyes one final time. Thank you. For last night, for the ride, for… She seemed to run out of words. Just thank you. Then she was gone, disappearing into her building without looking back. Adrian sat in the car for several minutes after she left, staring at the door she'd vanished through. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to follow, to make sure she got inside safely, to see where she lived and worked and existed when she wasn't with him, to establish control over variables he couldn't manage from a distance. But he forced himself to put the car in drive and pull away, allowing her the space and autonomy she clearly needed. He'd given her his number. The next move was hers. That decision lasted exactly 3 days. 72 hours of returning to his regular operations, meeting with his lieutenants, managing his various enterprises, attending to the 1,000 details that required his attention, while his mind kept drifting back to a woman who'd looked at him like he was human rather than a force of nature. On the 4th morning, Marcus found him in his office reviewing shipping manifests that should have held his full attention, but didn't. You're distracted, his enforcer observed, settling into the chair across from Adrian's desk. That's not like you. I'm fine. You've read the same page 3 times. Marcus leaned back, studying Adrian with the familiarity of 15 years of loyalty. This about the woman from the gala? Adrian's fingers tightened on the paper. What woman? The florist you left with, the one you've been thinking about instead of focusing on the Patterson shipment that's 2 days behind schedule. Marcus's expression held no judgment, just observation. Want to tell me why a one-night stand has you this distracted? It's handled. Clearly it's not, or you wouldn't be staring at manifests like they're written in a foreign language. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. If she's a problem, I can... Don't. Adrian's voice went cold. Don't even finish that sentence. I wasn't suggesting harm, Marcus said quickly. Just distance. If she's become a liability, she's not a liability. She's... Adrian stopped, unsure how to finish. What was Lena Brooks to him? A complication? An obsession? A mistake he couldn't stop replaying in his mind? She's nothing. Forget I mentioned it. But Marcus knew him too well to accept the lie. When was the last time nothing had you this off balance? Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he set down the manifests and pulled up a different file on his computer. Background research he'd commissioned the morning after their night together. Information he'd told himself he needed for security purposes, but had really wanted because he couldn't stop thinking about her. Lena Brooks, 26 years old. Owner of Wildflower Arrangements, a small flower shop she'd opened 3 years ago with a business loan she was still paying off. No family in the area, her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her with enough insurance money to finish college, but not much else. Clean record. No debts beyond the business loan and standard student loans. No romantic entanglements that the investigator could find. She was exactly what she appeared to be. An ordinary woman building an ordinary life through hard work and careful choices, until she'd made the reckless choice of spending the night with him. She was untouched, Adrian said quietly, the admission heavy on his tongue. Before me, she'd never... He couldn't finish, the weight of what he'd taken settling over him like lead. And I didn't know until it was too late. Marcus's expression shifted to something almost like sympathy. That changes things. Does it? You know it does. For you, anyway. His enforcer leaned forward, his voice dropping. You gonna see her again? I gave her my number. She hasn't called. Maybe she won't. Maybe. Adrian pulled up the street view of her shop, studying the modest storefront with its cheerful window displays and hand-painted sign. But I need to know she's all right. Then go check on her. You don't need permission. The suggestion was logical, practical, exactly what Adrian wanted to hear. But something held him back. The memory of Lena's defensive posture that morning, the way she'd insisted last night meant nothing, the careful walls she'd erected between them. She'd chosen distance. He should respect that. His phone rang, Marcus's name flashing on the screen of the burner he kept for business calls. Adrian answered, his mind already shifting to whatever crisis required attention. We have a situation, Marcus said without preamble. The Patterson shipment. Customs flagged 3 containers. They're requesting additional documentation. Stall them. I'll handle it. Adrian was already standing, gathering his keys. How long do we have? 24 hours before they escalate to full inspection. More than enough time. He headed for the door, his focus finally sharpening on something concrete he could control. Meet me at the warehouse in 30 minutes. The next 18 hours consumed him with the kind of crisis management he excelled at. Bribing the right officials, producing falsified documents, redistributing cargo to avoid detection. By the time he returned to his penthouse past midnight, the situation had been contained, the shipment cleared, and another potential disaster averted through calculated corruption. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, collapsing into bed alone, all he could think about was Lena Brooks and whether she was sleeping as poorly as he was. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent and accusatory. She hadn't called, hadn't reached out, was probably moving on with her life exactly as planned, treating their night together as the meaningless encounter he'd promised it would be. Adrian picked up his personal phone and scrolled to her shop's number. Not the cell phone he'd given her, but the business line listed on her website. His thumb hovered over the call button. This was insane. He didn't chase women, didn't obsess over complications, didn't allow distractions to interfere with the careful control he maintained over every aspect of his life. He dialed anyway. The phone rang 4 times before her voicemail picked up, her voice bright and professional, inviting customers to leave a message about their floral needs. Adrian hung up without speaking, disgust at his own weakness warring with the desperate need to hear her voice, to know she was real and safe, and thinking about him even a fraction as much as he was thinking about her. This had to stop. Whatever obsession had taken root that night needed to be excised before it became a genuine liability. Lena Brooks was a civilian, an innocent, someone whose life would only be destroyed by proximity to his world. The smart thing, the right thing, was to let her go. He made it until noon the next day before he cracked. The flower shop sat on a corner in Sunset Park, exactly as unpretentious as he'd expected. Adrian parked down the block, watching the storefront through his windshield like some kind of stalker. Customers came and went, elderly women selecting bouquets, a young couple discussing wedding arrangements, a delivery driver picking up orders. And there, visible through the front window, Lena moved through her domain with the same quiet confidence he'd witnessed at the gala. She smiled at customers, arranged stems with practiced efficiency, created beauty from simple materials in ways that made it look effortless. She looked fine. More than fine. She looked exactly like someone who'd moved on from a reckless night with a dangerous man and returned to her real life without complication. Adrian should have felt relieved. Instead, watching her laugh at something a customer said, he felt the possessive hunger that had driven him here intensify into something sharper. Mine, something primitive whispered in his chest. She was mine first, and that means something. He was reaching for the door handle when his phone rang. Marcus. "We have a problem," his enforcer said without greeting. "Viktor Kozlov wants a meeting." Adrian went cold. Viktor Kozlov was the head of the Russian faction that controlled most of Brooklyn's underworld. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. They'd maintained an uneasy truce for years, neither side pushing into the other's territory, both benefiting from the stability that arrangement provided. If Viktor wanted a meeting, something had shifted. "When?" Adrian asked, his eyes still on Lena through the shop window. "Tonight. The usual place. He says it's urgent." "Did he say what it's about?" "No, but he mentioned bringing extra security. Said you should do the same." Which meant Viktor expected conflict, not negotiation. Adrian's mind raced through possibilities. Had someone violated the territorial agreements? Was there a new player trying to start a war? Had one of his own people betrayed him? "I'll be there." He started the car, forcing himself to drive away from the flower shop and the woman inside who represented everything he couldn't afford to want. "Get 8 men, armed but subtle, and make sure they know, if this goes sideways, priority is getting me out, not starting a war." Understood. Adrian glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, catching a final glimpse of Lena through the shop window. Then he forced his attention forward, back to the world he actually inhabited, the one built on violence and strategy, where showing weakness meant death and caring about someone made them a target. The meeting location was a warehouse Viktor's people used for legitimate importing, the perfect cover for less legal operations. Adrian arrived with his 8-man security team to find Viktor already there with 12 of his own, a deliberate show of force that set Adrian's instincts on high alert. Viktor Kozlov looked exactly like the stereotype of a Russian mob boss, barrel-chested, heavily scarred, with cold eyes that had witnessed more violence than most people could imagine. He smiled as Adrian approached, but the expression held no warmth. "Adrian Vale," he said, his accent thick but his English perfect. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Viktor." Adrian kept his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling through the warehouse. "Your message suggested urgency. What can I do for you?" "Direct. I appreciate that." Viktor gestured to a makeshift seating area, 2 chairs facing each other across a scarred wooden table. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Adrian sat, acutely aware of the armed men surrounding them, the multiple exits, the various weapons concealed on his own body. Marcus stood at his right shoulder, a silent threat to anyone who might try something stupid. "I'll be direct as well," Viktor said, settling into his chair with surprising grace for a man his size. "I know about your involvement with the Patterson shipping operation. I know you've been laundering money through 3 separate construction companies. I know about your arrangement with Senator Whitmore and at least 8 other politicians whose careers you've purchased." Adrian's expression didn't change, but internally, alarm screamed. That was information Viktor shouldn't have. Information that suggested either a leak in Adrian's organization or surveillance sophisticated enough to penetrate his carefully constructed security. "Interesting theories," Adrian said carefully, "though I'm not sure why you're sharing them with me." "Because I want to propose a partnership." Victor leaned forward, his eyes sharp with calculated ambition. Your networks are impressive, but limited. My resources are extensive, but I lack your political connections. Together, we could control this entire city. No more territorial disputes, no more competition, just profit and power shared between us. And if I decline this generous offer? Victor's smile widened. Then I share everything I know with the FBI agents who've been investigating your operations for 6 months. Your political friends won't be able to protect you from federal charges, Adrian. You'll spend the next 20 years in prison watching your empire crumble. There it was, the threat beneath the proposition. Join Victor or be destroyed. Adrian considered his options with the rapid calculation that had kept him alive this long. If Victor actually had evidence of his operations, going to war would only accelerate his exposure. But accepting partnership meant surrendering the independence that gave him power, becoming beholden to a man whose brutality made Adrian's calculated violence look restrained. I'll need time to consider, Adrian said. Of course, take 48 hours, but understand. Victor's expression hardened. This offer expires then. After that, I move forward with or without your cooperation. And trust me, you'd rather have me as a partner than an enemy. Adrian stood, Marcus immediately at his side. I'll be in touch. They made it out of the warehouse without incident, but Adrian's mind churned with the implications. As soon as they were in the car, he turned to Marcus. Find the leak. I want to know how Victor got that information, and I want the person responsible brought to me, alive. Already on it, Marcus said grimly. But Adrian, what if there is no leak? What if he's got federal surveillance we don't know about? Then we have bigger problems than I thought. Adrian stared out the window at Brooklyn passing by, his strategic mind already working through scenarios and contingencies. Either way, we need to know what we're dealing with before I make a decision. His phone buzzed. An unknown number, but the area code was local. Adrian answered without thinking. Yes? Hi, it's Lana. Her voice sounded uncertain, almost shy. Lena Brooks, from the hotel. I wasn't sure if you'd remember. I remember. Adrian's entire focus shifted, the crisis with Victor temporarily forgotten. Are you all right? I'm fine, She paused, and he could hear traffic in the background, suggesting she was walking somewhere. I wanted to thank you for being kind, for respecting my choices the next morning, for not making it weird or difficult. You called to thank me? He couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Is that strange? Most people don't call to thank me for anything. Adrian found himself smiling despite the chaos swirling around him. But I'm glad you did. I've been thinking about you. Silence on the other end long enough that he thought she might have hung up. Then, quietly, have you? Constantly. The admission was more honest than he'd intended, which is extremely inconvenient since you made it clear you wanted distance. I did. I do. Lena's voice wavered. I don't know what I want. That's not normal for me. I always know what I want. And what do you think you might want, if you were being honest? To see you again, she whispered. Which is insane, because everything about this is a terrible idea, and I should absolutely stay as far away from you as possible. Adrian's chest tightened with something he couldn't name. But I can't stop thinking about that night, about you. About the way you made me feel like I mattered beyond what I could provide or perform. Like you actually saw me. I did see you, Lena. I do see you. Then come see me now. The words tumbled out in a rush, like she had to say them before courage failed. I'm closing the shop early. I live above it. Just, if you meant what you said about thinking about me, prove it. Show up. Adrian met Marcus's eyes in the rearview mirror. His enforcer's expression was carefully neutral, but the message was clear. This was a distraction Adrian couldn't afford. Not with Victor's ultimatum hanging over him. Not with potential federal surveillance. Not with everything at stake. Give me 20 minutes, Adrian said into the phone. He hung up before she could change her mind, before he could change his, before logic could override the desperate need to see her again. This is a mistake, Marcus said quietly. Probably. Victor's deadline can wait 24 hours while we investigate. Adrian's tone left no room for argument. Take me to Sunset Park. Then work on finding that leak. Marcus didn't argue further, just changed direction and headed toward Brooklyn. They drove in silence, Adrian's mind oscillating between the strategic crisis Victor represented and the personal chaos Lena promised. He should be focused on survival, on protecting his empire, on making calculated decisions that ensured his continued power. Instead, all he could think about was the way Lena had sounded on the phone, nervous and brave and wanting him despite knowing better. When they pulled up outside her shop, Marcus turned in his seat. Be careful. If Victor's watching you, anyone you care about becomes leverage. The observation landed like a physical blow. Adrian hadn't considered that, the danger his attention might bring to Lena, the way his enemies could use her against him if they knew she mattered. No one knows about her, Adrian said, but even as he spoke, doubt crept in. Victor had known things he shouldn't. What else might he know? You're sure about that? Adrian wasn't sure about anything anymore, except that he needed to see Lena Brooks with an intensity that bordered on addiction. Wait here, he said, climbing out of the car. If I'm not back in 2 hours, assume something's wrong. He took the stairs to her apartment 2 at a time, his heart hammering with anticipation that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with a woman who'd somehow become essential in less than a week. Lena opened the door before he could knock, still wearing the simple jeans and sweater she'd probably worked in all day. No makeup, hair pulled back, completely unadorned. Perfect. Hi, she said, stepping back to let him enter. Hi. Adrian crossed the threshold into her small apartment, taking in details. Books stacked on every surface, plants covering the windowsills, the faint scent of jasmine, and something distinctly her. Thank you for calling. Thank you for coming. She closed the door, then seemed unsure what to do with her hands. I wasn't sure you would. I'll always come if you call. The words were out before he could stop them, a promise he had no business making but meant anyway. Lena's eyes widened. Adrian? I know. He interrupted, moving closer. I know this is complicated and dangerous and probably going to end badly for both of us. I know you deserve better than whatever this is. But I can't seem to care about any of that as much as I should. What are you saying? I'm saying one night wasn't enough. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, feeling her tremble at his touch. I'm saying I want more. More nights, more conversations, more of everything you're willing to give me. And I'm saying that terrifies me more than anything else in my life right now. Lena's hands came up to grip his wrists, not pushing away but anchoring. I'm scared too. Of me? Of this. Of wanting something I can't have. Of making choices that will change everything. Her eyes searched his face. You said one night wouldn't mean anything. You promised. I lied. The admission felt like liberation and condemnation at once. Or maybe I didn't know I was lying until I walked away from you and realized I'd left something essential behind. What are we doing? She whispered. I don't know. Adrian pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. But I know I'm not ready to walk away. Are you? Instead of answering, Lena rose on her toes and kissed him with the same desperate hunger that had ignited between them that first night. Adrian responded instantly, hauling her against him, pouring everything he couldn't say into the connection between them. This was madness, recklessness, everything he'd spent his life avoiding. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian Vale stopped calculating consequences and just felt. They barely made it to her bedroom before need overwhelmed restraint. Adrian lifted Lena against him, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her down the narrow hallway, their mouths fused together with desperate intensity. This time there was no careful seduction, no measured patience, just raw hunger and the certainty that whatever existed between them had moved far beyond physical attraction into territory neither could control. Afterward, they lay tangled in her sheets as afternoon light painted patterns across the ceiling. Lena's head rested on Adrian's chest, her fingers tracing idle circles over his heart. The silence felt comfortable in ways that surprised them both. No awkwardness, no regret, just the quiet contentment of two people who'd found unexpected shelter in each other. I have to tell you something, Lena said finally, her voice soft against his skin. And you're probably going to want to leave when you hear it. Adrian's hand stilled in her hair, every protective instinct suddenly on high alert. What is it? She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself like armor, her dark eyes serious. My last name isn't actually Brooks. I mean, it is legally. I changed it when I turned 18, but I was born Lena Kozlov. The name hit Adrian like a physical blow. He sat up slowly, his mind racing through implications and connections, trying to make sense of what she'd just revealed. Kozlov. As in, Victor Kozlov is my father. The words came out flat, resigned, like she'd delivered this confession before and knew exactly how it would be received. I haven't spoken to him in 8 years. I left home the day I turned 18 and never looked back. He doesn't know where I live, where I work. He doesn't even know I'm still in New York. Adrian's strategic mind spun through the ramifications at dizzying speed. The daughter of his enemy, the one weakness Victor might exploit if he knew she existed. The perfect leverage wrapped in soft skin and genuine smiles. And he just claimed her, marked her, made her his in ways that would destroy them both if Victor discovered the connection. Say something, Lena whispered, watching his face with mounting dread. Please. Why did you leave? Adrian forced the question past the chaos in his head. What happened? Lena's hands twisted in the sheet, her gaze dropping to her lap. My mother died when I was 10. After that, my father became someone I didn't recognize. The man who used to read me bedtime stories and take me to Central Park turned into someone who hurt people without remorse, who built an empire on suffering, who looked at me like I was property to be traded, rather than a daughter to be loved. Did he hurt you? The question came out harder than Adrian intended, rage already building at the thought. Not physically, but there are other ways to damage someone. She met his eyes again, and he saw old pain there, carefully buried but never quite forgotten. When I was 16, he arranged a marriage for me, to the son of another crime family, someone who would strengthen his position. I was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to serve his ambitions. Adrian's jaw clenched. What did you do? I pretended to comply while I planned my escape, saved every dollar I could hide, applied to colleges under my mother's maiden name. The day after my 18th birthday, I walked out with nothing but a backpack and never looked back. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, pride mixing with the pain. I put myself through school working 3 jobs, started my business with a loan I'll be paying off for another 5 years, built a life that's completely mine, where no one owns me or controls me or makes decisions about my future. The fierce independence he'd sensed in her that first night suddenly made perfect sense. She'd fought for her freedom in ways Adrian had never had to, choosing poverty and struggle over the security that came with submission. Does he look for you? Adrian asked quietly. At first, yes, but I was careful, changed my name, moved boroughs, kept my head down. Lena's expression hardened with old defiance. Eventually, he must have decided I wasn't worth the effort. Or maybe he was relieved to have one less complication. Either way, I've been invisible to him for years. Until now. Adrian stood, pacing to the window, his mind already calculating the danger she was in simply by being in the same room with him. Lena, my meeting tonight, the one I left early for, it was with your father. He heard her sharp intake of breath behind him. What? He wants a partnership, or rather, he's threatening me into one by claiming he has evidence of my operations. Adrian turned to face her, needing to see her reaction. He gave me 48 hours to decide. If I refuse, he promises to destroy everything I've built. Lena had gone pale, the sheet clutched to her chest. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But now, knowing who you are, everything just became infinitely more complicated. Because I'm his daughter. She said it like a curse, like the worst part of herself had been revealed. Because being with me puts you in danger. Because being with me puts you in danger, Adrian corrected, moving back to the bed. If Victor finds out about us, if he discovers I'm involved with you, he'll use you against me, and I... He stopped, the truth too heavy to voice. I couldn't survive losing you. I barely know you, and I already know I couldn't survive it. Then we stop, Lena said, her voice breaking despite her attempt at strength. Right now, before it goes any further, you walk away, I stay invisible, and we both forget this ever happened. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Is that what you want? It's what makes sense. What keeps us both safe. That's not what I asked. His thumbs brushed away the tears starting to fall. Do you want me to walk away, Lena? Because I will. If that's what you truly want, I'll leave right now and you'll never see me again. She closed her eyes, more tears escaping. No, I don't want that. But I don't want you hurt because of who my father is. Too late. Adrian pulled her against him, holding her with a ferocity that surprised them both. I was already in too deep before I knew. This just means we have to be smarter about it. How? Lena pulled back to look at him. How do we be smart about something this dangerous? We keep you hidden. No public appearances together, no trail that leads back to you. As far as the world knows, we don't exist to each other. Even as he said it, Adrian hated the words, hated the necessity of hiding what was quickly becoming the most genuine thing in his life. And your decision about my father's proposal? That's separate. I'll handle Victor the way I handle every threat, strategically, carefully, with complete focus on survival. He pressed his forehead to hers. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I don't know you well enough to trust you. Then get to know me. Adrian's mouth curved slightly. We have 48 hours before I have to give Victor an answer. Spend them with me. That's insane. Probably. But I'm done making safe choices where you're concerned. He kissed her gently, tasting salt from her tears. Stay with me, Lena. Let me prove I'm worth the risk. She should have said no, should have protected herself the way she'd learned to do over 8 years of careful invisibility. But instead, she kissed him back and whispered against his mouth, 48 hours. Then we figure out what comes next. Adrian pulled her closer, already knowing that 48 hours would never be enough, that he was making promises he might not be able to keep, that loving Viktor Kozlov's daughter might be the most dangerous choice he'd ever made. But for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Adrian Vale chose want over strategy, and consequences be damned. They spent the evening in Lena's small apartment, a bubble of normalcy that felt surreal given the chaos surrounding them. She cooked pasta with the kind of unself-conscious competence that suggested years of practice, moving around her tiny kitchen while Adrian sat at the counter and watched her with an intensity that made her blush. You're staring, she said, stirring sauce with more focus than the task required. You're beautiful. Adrian accepted the wine she'd poured, studying the deep red like it held answers. And I'm memorizing this. You, here, doing something completely ordinary. It's... He stopped, unsure how to articulate what he was feeling. Different from your usual life? Lena guessed, bringing plates to the small table by the window. Everything about you is different from my usual life. Adrian joined her at the table, the domesticity of the moment almost overwhelming. I don't do this. Cook dinner, spend quiet evenings, talk about anything that matters. What do you usually do? Work, plan, strategize, attend events where every conversation is calculated and every smile is performance. He took a bite of pasta, surprised by how good it was. This is excellent, by the way. My mother's recipe. Lena's expression softened with old memory. She taught me to cook before she died. Said a woman should know how to feed the people she loves. Tell me about her. Lena hesitated, clearly unused to sharing these pieces of herself. Then slowly she began to talk about a mother who'd been kind and creative, who'd loved flowers and classical music and bedtime stories, who'd softened Victor's edges and brought light into a world built on darkness. She made him better, Lena said quietly. Or maybe she just made him want to be better. After she died, there was nothing to balance the violence, nothing to remind him that there were choices beyond power and control. Do you think he loved her? In his way, yes. But love wasn't enough to change who he fundamentally was. Lena met Adrian's eyes across the table. That's what scares me about this. About us. What if caring about each other isn't enough to overcome what you are? What I come from? Adrian reached across the table to take her hand. I can't promise you a future, Lena. I can't even promise you next week. But I can promise that whatever time we have, it'll be real. No performance, no calculation, just honest want and whatever we can build from that. And when it ends? Her fingers tightened on his. Because it will end, Adrian. People like you don't get happy endings. Then we make the middle count. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. We take these 48 hours and whatever time comes after, and we make every moment matter. Lena's phone rang, shattering the intimacy. She glanced at the screen, then went rigid. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Adrian said immediately, every instinct on alert. But she was already swiping to accept, her hand trembling slightly. Hello? Adrian watched her face drain of color, saw her entire body go tense with recognition and fear. She mouthed a single word that made his blood run cold. Father. I don't know what you're talking about, Lena said into the phone, her voice admirably steady despite the terror in her eyes. I haven't seen you in 8 years. Why would I? She stopped, listening. Adrian moved around the table, pressing close enough to hear the deep, accented voice on the other end. Do not play games with me, daughter. I know you are in New York. I know you run a little flower shop in Brooklyn. I know every choice you have made since you ran away like a coward. Victor's voice was cold, cruel. And now I know something else interesting. Tell me, does Adrian Vale know who you really are? Or have you been lying to him the way you lied to me? Lena's eyes met Adrian's, panic and apology warring in their depths. I don't know what you're... Enough! Victor's voice cut like a blade. You have been seen together, photographed. My daughter and my soon-to-be business partner. How convenient. So now we discuss terms. What terms? Lena's voice shook now, courage fracturing under the weight of her father's attention. You will come see me tomorrow, alone. We have much to discuss about your future and your poor choice in companions. If you refuse, I will make sure your Adrian understands exactly what happens to people who touch what belongs to me. I don't belong to you, Lena said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. You will always belong to me. You carry my blood, my name, my legacy, whether you want it or not. Victor's voice softened into something almost resembling affection, which made it more terrifying. Come home, Lena, or I will bring you home. Your choice. The line went dead. Lena stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her breathing rapid and shallow. Adrian gently took the device from her hand and set it on the table, then pulled her against his chest. He knows, she whispered. He knows about us. He knows where I am. He knows everything. How? Adrian's mind raced through possibilities. How did he find out? I don't know. Maybe he's been watching you. Maybe someone saw us together and recognized me. Maybe... She pulled back, new horror dawning in her eyes. Maybe this was all a trap. Maybe he arranged the whole thing. The gala, my contract with the hotel, our meeting. Maybe none of it was real. The thought had already occurred to Adrian, the strategic part of his brain cataloging the suspicious convenience of their connection. But looking at Lena's devastated expression, remembering the genuine surprise in her eyes that first night, he dismissed it. No, he said firmly. Whatever else Victor planned, he didn't plan us. That was real. How can you be sure? Because I've spent my entire life reading people, identifying manipulation, seeing through strategy. And you, he cupped her face, forcing her to see the certainty in his eyes. You were surprised by me, by what happened between us, by everything you felt. That wasn't performance. But the timing is coincidental or opportunistic, but not orchestrated. Adrian's voice hardened with resolve. Victor may have discovered our connection and is now trying to use it. But he didn't create it. We did that all on our own. Lena sagged against him, the fear and adrenaline draining away to leave her shaking. What do we do now? Now you tell me everything you remember about your father's operations, his security, his habits, his weaknesses, every detail, no matter how small. She pulled back to stare at him. Why? Because if he's going to use you against me, I need to know how to protect you. And if necessary, Adrian's expression went cold with lethal intent. How to destroy him. He's my father, Adrian. I hate him. I fear him, but he's still a man who just threatened you, who called you property, who's prepared to hurt you to control me. Adrian's voice left no room for argument. I don't care about blood relations or family loyalty. I care about keeping you safe. So tell me what I need to know. Lena searched his face, clearly struggling between old loyalties and new ones, between the daughter she'd been and the woman she'd become. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but we do this my way. No unnecessary violence. No war unless there's absolutely no other choice. Agreed. Adrian would have promised anything in that moment to ease the fear in her eyes. Now talk to me. Start with his security detail. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything Lena could remember: the layout of Victor's various properties, the names of his most trusted lieutenants, his habits and routines, and the few vulnerabilities she'd observed during her years in his household. Adrian committed every detail to memory, already formulating strategies and contingencies. He has a safe house in Red Hook, Lena said, exhaustion creeping into her voice as midnight approached. That's where he takes people he wants to intimidate. Away from his main operations, fewer witnesses. If he tells me to meet him somewhere, it'll probably be there. You're not going. I might not have a choice. There's always a choice. Adrian pulled her against him on the couch where they'd settled hours ago. And the choice is that you don't go anywhere near Victor without me. He said alone. I don't care what he said. You're not facing him without protection. Lena tilted her head back to look at him. You can't protect me from my own father, Adrian, not without starting exactly the war we're trying to avoid. Then we don't avoid it. The words came out flat, final. If war is what it takes to keep you safe, then that's what happens. You'd do that? Risk everything you've built over someone you barely know? Adrian understood what she was really asking. Was she worth it? Was what they'd found in a handful of days significant enough to justify the potential destruction of everything he'd spent years creating? The answer should have been no. Strategy demanded he cut his losses, walk away, protect his empire over a woman he'd known for less than a week. But looking at Lena's exhausted, frightened face, Adrian realized the calculation had already been made the moment she'd walked through that terrace door. Yes, he said simply. I would risk it all. Lena's eyes filled with tears. That's the most romantic and terrifying thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm a romantic and terrifying man. Adrian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth with achingly gentle reverence. Now stop arguing and let me protect you. You're very bossy. You're very stubborn. We're a disaster, Lena said, but she was smiling despite the tears. Probably. Adrian stood, pulling her up with him. Come on, pack a bag. You're staying with me until this is resolved. Your place? No, somewhere safer. Somewhere Victor won't think to look. Where? Adrian pulled out his phone, texting Marcus with rapid efficiency. A property I own under a shell corporation, completely off the books. You'll be safe there while I deal with your father. I don't want to hide while you fight my battles. Too bad. He steered her toward the bedroom, already mentally cataloging what she'd need. Pack enough for a few days. Comfortable clothes, nothing fancy. We leave in 20 minutes. Lena started to protest, then seemed to read something in his expression that made argument pointless. Instead, she went to her closet and began pulling clothes from hangers with jerky movements that betrayed her emotional state. Adrian watched her pack, his phone buzzing with Marcus's confirmation that the safe house was ready. In less than 6 hours, Victor's 48-hour deadline would be half expired. Adrian needed that time to prepare, to investigate, to determine whether partnership or warfare was the smarter choice. But first, he needed Lena somewhere Victor couldn't reach her. His phone rang again. Marcus. We found the leak, his enforcer said without preamble. Thomas Chen. He's been feeding information to the Russians for 3 months in exchange for covering his gambling debts. Adrian's jaw clenched. Thomas was Marcus's younger brother, someone they'd trusted with sensitive information. Where is he now? Safe house in Queens, waiting for you. Good. I'll be there in an hour. Adrian glanced at Lena, still packing. Did he know about the woman? No, we kept that completely contained, but he gave Victor enough to piece together most of your operation. The threat is real, Adrian. Victor has evidence that could bury you. Then we deal with it. Adrian's voice went cold with lethal focus. Prepare Thomas for interrogation. I want to know everything he told Victor, every detail, every conversation. And Marcus, yeah? This is going to hurt you. I'm sorry. Silence on the other end, heavy with the weight of betrayal and blood loyalty. He made his choice. Do what needs to be done. Adrian ended the call to find Lena watching him, her bag packed and sitting on the bed. "Someone betrayed you," she said quietly. "Yes, and now I have to handle it." "Does handling it mean killing them?" Adrian met her eyes, refusing to lie. "Probably. Does that change how you see me?" Lena was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "I always knew what you were, who you were. I chose you anyway. Knowing something intellectually and seeing it directly are different things." "I know." She crossed to him, her hands settling on his chest over his heart. "And I'm choosing to believe that the man who held me while I cried, who cooked me breakfast, who promised to protect me despite the cost, that man is just as real as the one who has to do terrible things to survive." Adrian covered her hands with his, the gesture anchoring. "What if you're wrong? What if the terrible things are the truth, and everything else is just the mask I wear to feel human? Then I guess we're both pretending." Lena rose on her toes to kiss him softly. "Because I'm pretending that loving Viktor Kozlov's daughter doesn't make me my father's child, that the blood in my veins doesn't carry his violence, that I can build something clean from dirty foundations. You're nothing like him. Neither are you." The words settled between them, a shared fiction they both needed to believe. Adrian pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "I have to go handle this," he said finally. "Marcus will take you to the safe house. Stay there until I come for you." "How long will you be?" "As long as it takes." He pulled back to look at her. "But Lena, whatever happens in the next 24 hours, whatever you hear about me or what I've done, remember that I'm doing it to keep you safe. Can you remember that?" She nodded, but fear crept back into her eyes. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise." "Promise me you won't start a war unless there's no other choice." "I promise to make the smartest choice available to me in the moment." It was the most honest answer he could give. Lena accepted it with a small nod, then kissed him one last time, desperate and clinging and tasting like goodbye. 15 minutes later, Adrian watched Marcus drive away with Lena in the passenger seat, her face turned back to catch a last glimpse of him through the rear window. Then he climbed into his own car and headed toward Queens, and the interrogation that would determine whether partnership or warfare was inevitable. Thomas Chen looked like he'd been crying when Adrian entered the safe house basement. He sat bound to a chair in the center of an otherwise empty room, two of Adrian's enforcers standing guard. Marcus stood in the corner, his expression carved from stone as he looked at his younger brother. "Adrian," Thomas said immediately, his voice breaking, "please, I can explain how you betrayed me, betrayed your own brother, sold information that could destroy everything we've built." Adrian's voice was conversational, almost friendly, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "By all means, I'm listening." Thomas's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. The gambling debts that had spiraled out of control, Victor's people approaching him with an offer, the initial reluctance that had gradually eroded under mounting pressure and fear. He'd told himself it was temporary, that he'd find a way out, that no real harm would come from sharing operational details. Adrian listened without interrupting, cataloging the information with clinical precision. When Thomas finally ran out of words, Adrian turned to Marcus. "Your brother. Your choice." Marcus's face remained impassive, but pain flickered in his eyes. "What did he tell them about the woman?" "Nothing," Thomas said quickly. "I swear, I didn't even know there was a woman. They never asked, and I never saw anything." "But you told them everything else." Marcus's voice was flat, dead. "Every shipment, every political connection, every operation we've spent 15 years building. You gave it all to Viktor Kozlov for what? To cover gambling debts you incurred being stupid and reckless?" "I'm sorry," Thomas whispered. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. You never meant to get caught." Marcus pulled his gun with steady hands, the weapon an extension of his will. "That's not the same as never meaning to betray us." Adrian watched the brothers stare at each other, one bound and terrified, one armed and resolute. This was the cost of his world, the price of power built on loyalty and violence. Thomas had broken the fundamental rule, and there was only one punishment that maintained order. But there was also mercy, and sometimes mercy was the smarter choice. "Marcus, Adrian said quietly. Put the gun away. His enforcer's eyes snapped to him. Adrian, I said put it away. Adrian moved closer to Thomas, studying the broken man with calculating assessment. Thomas, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. Are we clear? Yes, anything, please. You're going to go back to Victor. You're going to tell him I've agreed to partnership, and you're going to feed him false information about my operations while reporting back to me with everything he plans. Adrian crouched to Thomas's eye level. Can you do that? Understanding dawned in Thomas's expression, hope mixing with residual fear. You want me to be a double agent. I want you to earn back a fraction of the trust you destroyed. This doesn't forgive what you did. It doesn't restore you to your position. But it gives you a chance to make amends by helping me protect what you endangered. And if Victor finds out, then he'll kill you and you'll have earned that death through your own choices. Adrian stood, nodding to his enforcers. Release him. Marcus, set up the communication protocols. I want Thomas reporting every conversation with Victor directly to you. Marcus holstered his weapon, his expression still hard. And if he betrays us again, then I'll let you finish what you started tonight. Adrian met Thomas's eyes. You get one chance to fix this. One. Don't waste it. I won't, I swear. Adrian left the room without another word, Marcus following him up the stairs and out to the street where cold November air hit like a slap. You should have let me kill him, Marcus said once they were alone. Probably, but he's more useful alive and motivated than dead and unavenged. Adrian pulled out his phone, checking for messages from Lena. Nothing. Is she secure? Yes. The safe house is locked down. She won't be found. Good. Adrian stared at the dark Brooklyn sky, calculating his next move. Contact Victor. Tell him I've agreed to his partnership and want to meet tomorrow to discuss terms. You're actually going to partner with him? I'm going to make him think I am while I figure out how to destroy him without destroying myself in the process. Adrian's smile held no warmth. And if Thomas is smart enough to stay loyal this time, Victor will never see it coming. And the girl? Is off limits. Make sure everyone understands that. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or even mentions her existence answers to me directly. Marcus studied him for a long moment. You're falling for her, for real. It wasn't a question, but Adrian answered anyway. Past tense, I've already fallen. That's dangerous. Everything about my life is dangerous. At least this time I'm choosing the risk instead of having it forced on me. Adrian headed for his car. Get me everything we have on Victor's current operations. I want to know his vulnerabilities before tomorrow's meeting. You think you can outmaneuver him? I think he underestimates me because he's blinded by arrogance. And I think loving his daughter gives me insight he doesn't know I have. Adrian paused with his hand on the car door. Make sure she has everything she needs. Food, clothes, whatever makes her comfortable. This might take longer than 48 hours. Understood. Adrian drove toward his penthouse, his mind already working through strategies and contingencies, weighing the cost of partnership against the price of war. Victor wanted control, wanted to subsume Adrian's empire into his own brutal organization. But Adrian had spent too many years building independence to surrender it now, especially to a man who saw his own daughter as property, which meant war was probably inevitable. The question was whether Adrian could win it without losing everything and everyone that mattered in the process. His phone finally buzzed with a text from Lena's number, 3 words that made his chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. Stay safe. Come home. Home. As if his sterile penthouse or any of his carefully secured properties could be home. As if home was a place rather than a person. Adrian texted back a promise he had every intention of keeping, then prepared himself for the performance that would determine whether he and Lena had any chance at a future beyond these stolen moments. Tomorrow he'd meet with Viktor Kozlov and pretend to submit. He'd negotiate terms he had no intention of honoring, smile at jokes that weren't funny, and act like a man who could be controlled. And all the while, he'd be planning how to dismantle Victor's empire piece by piece, starting with the man's greatest weakness, his absolute certainty that no one would dare challenge him. Adrian had built his entire life on being underestimated. One more performance wouldn't kill him. But Viktor Kozlov had made a fatal mistake when he threatened Lena. He'd revealed that she mattered, that she was leverage, that harming her would hurt Adrian in ways violence couldn't, and in doing so, he'd given Adrian the one thing he needed most: a reason to stop calculating consequences and start embracing the ruthlessness that had always lived beneath his civilized surface. Victor wanted a partner. He'd get a predator instead. And by the time he realized his mistake, it would be far too late to save himself from the destruction he'd invited. The restaurant Victor chose for their meeting was exactly the kind of place Adrian expected: exclusive, discreet, with private rooms where conversations wouldn't be overheard and security could be positioned without drawing attention. Adrian arrived precisely on time, Marcus at his side, and 4 additional men waiting outside in strategic positions. Victor was already seated when Adrian entered the private dining room, a glass of vodka in his hand and that same predatory smile on his face. 2 of his enforcers flanked the door, their hands resting on visible weapons. "Adrian Vale," Victor said, rising to shake hands with the kind of crushing grip meant to establish dominance. "I'm pleased you've seen reason." "I'm a practical man," Adrian replied, matching the pressure before releasing. "Your proposal has merit. I'd be foolish not to consider it seriously." "Considering and accepting are different things." Victor gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Adrian sat, aware of Marcus taking position behind him, aware of the armed men at the door, aware that this entire meeting was a performance where one misstep could mean death. "Before we discuss business," Victor said, pouring Adrian a generous measure of vodka, "I must apologize for my daughter's rudeness last night. She has always been difficult, that one. Too much like her mother, stubborn, idealistic, convinced she can escape what she is." Adrian's hand tightened on the glass, but his expression remained neutral. "I wasn't aware you had a daughter." "Oh yes, beautiful girl, though she lacks respect for family." Victor's eyes glittered with something dangerous. "She ran away years ago, thinking she could build a life separate from mine. But blood is blood, yes? Eventually she will understand that she belongs to this world whether she wants to or not. And if she doesn't want to understand?" Adrian took a measured sip of vodka, playing the role of casual interest. "Then I will teach her the way I teach everyone who defies me." Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But you know something about this already, I think. You have met my Lena, have you not?" The trap snapped shut with perfect precision. Adrian could deny it and be caught in a lie, or admit it and reveal exactly how much leverage Victor had. He chose a third option. "I've met a lot of women," Adrian said smoothly. "You'll have to be more specific." Victor's laugh was harsh, without humor. "Do not play games with me. I have photographs. You leaving a hotel with her, visiting her apartment. You have been fucking my daughter, and now we will discuss what that means for our arrangement." Adrian set down his glass with careful control. "If you've known about this connection, why wait until now to mention it?" "Because I wanted to see how you would react, whether you would lie or show respect through honesty." Victor's expression hardened. "You chose poorly." "I chose to keep my private life private. There's a difference." "Nothing is private when it involves my family." Victor drained his vodka and poured another. "But perhaps this complicates things less than it might seem. You want my daughter? Fine. She comes with the partnership. You marry her, bind our families together properly, and together we build an empire that controls this entire coast." The casual way Victor offered his daughter like a business asset made Adrian's blood boil, but he kept his voice level. "And what does Lena think about this arrangement?" "What she thinks is irrelevant. She is my daughter. She will do as I command." Victor's smile turned cruel. "Unless you are telling me you care about her opinion? That you have developed feelings for this woman beyond what she offers in bed?" Adrian met Victor's eyes, understanding that every word was a test, every reaction cataloged and analyzed. Victor was trying to determine how much Lena mattered, how deeply the hook had set, how thoroughly he could manipulate Adrian through that connection. "I care about not being manipulated into decisions that serve your interests over mine," Adrian said carefully. "If you want partnership, let's discuss terms based on business merit. Leave your daughter out of it." "But she is very much in it now." Victor leaned back, completely at ease despite the tension crackling through the room. "You have claimed what is mine. In my world, that requires either payment or punishment. I am offering you payment. Legitimate claim to Lena through marriage, combined operations, shared profits. Refuse, and I will take punishment instead. By going to the FBI with whatever evidence you think you have? Among other things. Victor's expression went cold. I could also ensure that Lena suffers for your pride, that her little flower shop burns, that she understands the cost of defying me by choosing a man who cannot protect her. Adrian's control nearly fractured, rage surging through him with physical force. But he'd spent too many years mastering his reactions to break now, especially when Lena's safety depended on him maintaining the performance. You'd hurt your own daughter to prove a point, Adrian asked quietly. I would teach her the lesson she should have learned years ago, that family loyalty matters more than individual desire, that some choices have consequences she cannot escape. Victor studied Adrian with predatory focus. But you can save her from that lesson. Accept my terms. Marry her, bind yourself to my organization, and she remains safe. Refuse, and I will make sure you watch her suffer before I destroy everything you've built. The choice Victor offered was no choice at all. Submit completely or risk Lena's life along with his empire. It was a masterful trap, exploiting exactly the weakness Adrian had tried so hard to hide. But Victor had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Adrian would choose preservation over destruction, safety over chaos, strategic submission over reckless warfare. He'd assumed Adrian Vale was the kind of man who valued his empire more than the woman he loved. I need time to consider your terms, Adrian said, playing for the hours he needed to move pieces into position. This is a significant decision with long-term implications. You have until tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Victor's smile returned, confident in his victory. After that, my offer expires, and we proceed to less pleasant alternatives. Understood. Adrian stood, Marcus immediately alert behind him. I'll have my answer by then. See that you do. Victor remained seated, the gesture asserting dominance even in dismissal. And Adrian, do not try to hide my daughter from me. I have already found her once. I can find her again. The only question is whether I find her as your future wife or as an example of what happens when someone defies me. Adrian left the restaurant without responding, his mind already racing through contingencies and strategies. The moment they were in the car, Marcus spoke. He's not bluffing. If you refuse, he'll go after her. I know. Adrian pulled out his phone, texting rapid instructions to his most trusted people. Which is why we're not going to give him the chance. What are you planning? To do what I should have done from the beginning. Adrian's voice went cold with lethal intent. Remove Viktor Kozlov from the equation entirely. You're talking about assassination. Of a major crime boss with extensive security and connections throughout law enforcement. Marcus's tone held warning, not judgment. That's not a move you make lightly. There's nothing light about this decision. But Victor gave me no other option when he threatened Lena. Adrian met his enforcer's eyes. I need you to be honest with me. Can it be done? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind clearly working through scenarios. Yes, but not quickly, and not without significant risk. His security is extensive, getting close enough to, I don't need close, I need effective. Adrian's phone buzzed with responses from his people, confirmations that pieces were moving into place. Victor thinks he has me trapped, that threatening Lena gives him absolute leverage, but he's forgotten that men with nothing to lose are the most dangerous. You have everything to lose. Your empire, your freedom, possibly your life. And I'll lose all of it anyway if I submit to Victor's control. At least this way, I'm choosing the terms of engagement. Adrian stared out the window at Manhattan passing by, the city he'd claimed through violence and strategy. Contact everyone who owes me favors, every politician, every judge, every cop on my payroll. I want insurance that when this goes down, the investigation goes nowhere. And Lena? Stays exactly where she is until this is finished. She doesn't need to know what I'm planning. She'll figure it out. She's not stupid. No, she's not. Adrian's expression softened slightly at the thought of her. But by the time she realizes what I've done, Victor will already be gone and she'll be safe. That's all that matters. Marcus pulled up outside Adrian's penthouse, his expression troubled. There's another option. You could actually take the deal, marry her, partner with Victor, play the long game, and become exactly what Lena's afraid I am? A man who treats her like property to be traded? A monster who values power over everything else? Adrian shook his head. I'd rather die than prove her right about me. Even if refusing means she loses you anyway? The question hit harder than Adrian wanted to admit. If his plan failed, if Victor's security was better than expected, if any of 1,000 variables went wrong, Lena would be left alone to face her father's wrath. She'd blame herself for Adrian's death, carry that guilt the way she'd carried the weight of her mother's loss. But if his plan succeeded, she'd be free. Truly free. For the first time since Victor had tried to sell her into marriage at 60. Even then, Adrian said finally, better she hates me for dying than hates herself for becoming what her father wanted. He left Marcus in the car and headed up to his penthouse, fatigue and determination warring for dominance. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, cold, sterile, empty of everything that mattered. He poured himself a drink and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, watching lights flicker like distant promises. His phone rang. Lena's number. Hi, he said, his voice softening automatically. Hi. She sounded tired, but okay. Marcus said you were meeting with him, with my father. How did it go? Adrian debated lying, maintaining the fiction that everything was manageable. But he'd promised her honesty, and even now, especially now, that promise mattered. He knows about us. He's threatening to hurt you if I don't agree to partnership and marriage. Lena's sharp intake of breath carried clearly through the line. Marriage? His terms, not mine. He sees you as a bargaining chip to bind our organizations together. Adrian's grip tightened on the glass. I told him I needed time to consider. And are you considering it? No. The answer came without hesitation. I'm not trading you like property to save my empire. I'm not becoming the man your father is. Then what are you going to do? Adrian closed his eyes, the weight of what he was planning settling over him like a shroud. I'm going to make sure Victor can't hurt you. That's all you need to know. Adrian, Lena, please, trust me to handle this. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. I need you safe. I need you away from this. Can you do that for me? You're going to do something reckless. It wasn't a question. Something dangerous that might get you killed. I'm going to do what's necessary. That's not the same thing. In my world, it rarely is. Adrian turned from the window, pacing his empty living room like a caged animal. But I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if something happens to me, you run. You take the money I've set aside for you, you leave New York, you build the life you wanted somewhere he can't find you. I'm not running, Lena said fiercely. Not from him, and not from whatever this is between us. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice. You taught me that. Her voice cracked slightly. You taught me that choosing what scares you is sometimes braver than playing it safe. This is different. This is you protecting me the only way you know how, by shutting me out and making unilateral decisions about my safety. Lena's anger broke through her fear. But I'm not some delicate thing that needs to be hidden away, Adrian. I survived 8 years on my own. I built a life from nothing. I'm stronger than you think. I know how strong you are. That's not... Adrian stopped, frustration making his words clumsy. I can't think clearly with you in danger. I can't make smart decisions when every choice involves calculating risk to you. So please, just stay where you are and let me fix this. By killing my father? The blunt question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. By removing the threat he represents, Adrian said carefully. However, that needs to happen. And if that means his death? If that means blood on your hands that you can never wash off? Can you live with that? Can you? Adrian countered. Because if I do this, if I cross that line, there's no coming back from it. I'll be exactly what you've been afraid of. A killer, a monster, someone who solves problems with violence. You're already that person, Lena said quietly. You've always been that person. I knew it the first night we met. The difference is that now you're being honest about it instead of pretending. The observation cut deeper than Adrian expected. She was right. He'd been performing civilization, wearing the mask of the cultured businessman, while the predator underneath waited for permission to emerge. And now, with her safety at stake, the mask was dissolving completely. "I love you," Adrian said, the words surprising them both with their sudden appearance. "I didn't plan to. I didn't want to. But I do. And that means I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if you hate me for it afterward." Silence on the other end, so complete Adrian thought she'd hung up. Then barely a whisper, "I love you too, which is why I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Don't become him. Don't let hatred for my father turn you into the same kind of man, someone who sees people as obstacles to remove, problems to solve through violence. Promise me that if you do this, you do it because it's the only option left, not because it's the easiest." Adrian thought about Thomas Chen, bound and terrified in that basement, about the mercy he'd shown despite Marcus's readiness to kill, about all the times he'd chosen strategy over brutality, calculation over rage. "I promise," he said finally. "But Lena, if Victor forces my hand, if he makes violence the only option, then do what you have to do. Just come back to me afterward." Her voice broke on the last word. "Please come back to me." "I will." Adrian made the promise knowing he might not be able to keep it, knowing that men who waged war against enemies like Viktor Kozlov often didn't survive the conflict. "I swear I will." They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything, filling the distance between them with words because touch was impossible. When they finally said goodbye, Adrian felt the loss like a physical wound. He spent the rest of the night preparing, coordinating with his people, moving assets and resources into position. Marcus worked beside him, the two of them planning the kind of operation that would either secure their future or destroy everything they'd built. "This could start a war," Marcus observed around 3 a.m., both of them running on adrenaline and black coffee. "Even if we succeed, Victor's people will want revenge. Then we make sure there's no one left to want revenge." Adrian studied the building schematics Marcus had acquired, memorizing entry points and security stations. "We don't just remove Victor, we dismantle his entire organization in one coordinated strike. His lieutenants, his enforcers, everyone who might pick up the mantle. That's not surgical, that's scorched earth. It's survival." Adrian met his enforcer's eyes. "Victor gave me no choice when he threatened Lena, so we remove the threat completely, or we die trying." Marcus nodded slowly, acceptance settling over his features. "Then we do it right. No half measures, no mercy for anyone who might come after us later." They worked until dawn, finalizing plans that would set everything in motion. Adrian had people in place at Victor's primary residence, his warehouse operations, even the restaurant where they'd met. Coordinated strikes timed to hit simultaneously, leaving no opportunity for warning or escape. It was the kind of operation that could only work once. If they failed, Victor would retreat into security so tight that no second attempt would be possible. Adrian's phone buzzed at 7 a.m. Victor, calling an hour early. "I hope you slept well," the Russian said without preamble. "Because you have 1 hour to give me your answer. Partnership or war. Choose wisely." "I've made my choice," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Let's meet to discuss terms. Your warehouse in Red Hook. 30 minutes. Victor's pause suggested surprise. "You will come to me? Alone?" "With Marcus. Just us. You bring whoever you want." Adrian was already moving toward the door. "If we're going to be partners, we need to start trusting each other. Trust is earned, not given. Then let's start earning it." Adrian ended the call before Victor could question the sudden cooperation, nodding to Marcus. "Everyone in position? Confirmed. They're waiting for your signal." "Good. Let's go end this." The drive to Red Hook felt simultaneously endless and too short. Adrian used the time to center himself, to transition from the man who loved Lena Brooks into the predator who'd built an empire on calculated violence. This was who he'd always been, underneath the performance. The question was whether he could live with himself afterward. Victor's warehouse loomed ahead, a massive structure surrounded by security that had been doubled since their last meeting. Adrian counted at least 20 armed men visible, with probably twice that number hidden inside. This is a trap, Marcus said quietly. He's expecting us to try something. I know. Adrian pulled up to the main entrance, parking exactly where Victor's people could see them. But he's also arrogant enough to believe we won't try anything here, in his stronghold, surrounded by his men. And we're arrogant enough to prove him wrong? We're desperate enough. Adrian climbed out of the car, his hands visible and empty, which makes us more dangerous than he realizes. Victor met them at the entrance, that same predatory smile on his face. Adrian Vale, I must admit I'm surprised you chose to come here. Most men in your position would have demanded neutral ground. Most men in my position don't appreciate being threatened. Adrian kept his tone conversational as they walked deeper into the warehouse. But I'm a practical man. You have leverage, I have resources. Perhaps we can find arrangement that benefits us both. You mean you will accept my terms? Victor led them into a large office that had been set up in the warehouse's interior. Comfortable furniture, expensive art, all the trappings of power transplanted into an industrial space. I mean, I understand that you have evidence of my operations, that you could destroy me if you chose to. Adrian settled into the offered chair, projecting calm he didn't feel. What I don't understand is why you'd want to. Destroying me gains you nothing. Partnering with me expands your reach significantly. Finally, you speak sense. Victor poured vodka for all of them. His movements relaxed now that he believed victory was assured. Tell me, what changed your mind? Last night you were resistant. Today you come to my warehouse ready to negotiate. Last night I was angry. Today I'm realistic. Adrian accepted the glass, using the motion to scan the room for exits and threats. You're right that partnership offers benefits. My political connections combined with your resources create something powerful. And my daughter? You accept that she comes with the arrangement? Adrian's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to nod. If those are your terms. They are. You marry Lena within the month, bind our families properly. In exchange, I give you access to my distribution networks and protection from federal investigation. Victor raised his glass. To partnership, yes? Adrian raised his own glass, meeting Victor's eyes over the rim. To partnership. They drank. The vodka burned going down, but Adrian barely noticed. His mind was counting seconds, calculating timing, waiting for the signal that would set everything in motion. Victor set down his glass and stood, moving to a safe built into the wall. I have documents here that outline my evidence against you. Once we sign our agreement, these become insurance rather than threat. You betray me, they go to FBI. I betray you, you have copies to use against me. Mutually assured destruction, the foundation of all good partnerships. He was opening the safe when Adrian's phone buzzed. A single word from Marcus's brother Thomas, who'd been positioned across the street with a rifle. Clear. Actually, Adrian said, setting down his glass and standing, I have a better proposal. Victor turned, papers in hand, suspicion finally creeping into his expression. What proposal? I dismantle your empire, free your daughter from your control, and remove you as a threat to everyone you've terrorized. Adrian's voice went cold. All pretense dropped. Starting right now. Victor reached for the gun at his waist, but Marcus was faster. The suppressed shot took Victor in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the papers scattering across the floor. You dare! Victor snarled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. I dare everything when you threaten someone I love. Adrian pulled his own weapon, keeping it trained on Victor while Marcus checked the hallway. Your men outside? Currently being dealt with by mine. Your lieutenants across the city? Simultaneous strikes happening as we speak. Your evidence? About to burn along with this entire warehouse. Victor's face contorted with rage and pain. You think killing me solves anything? My people will hunt you, will destroy you, will make you watch Lena die before they kill you too. Your people will scatter like rats when they realize their leader is dead and their operations compromised. Some will try revenge. Most will run. Adrian moved closer, his weapon steady. But you won't be around to see it either way. You're making a mistake, Victor hissed. Lena will never forgive you for this, for killing her father, monster that I am. Maybe, but she'll be alive to hate me. That's more than she'd have if I let you continue controlling her life. Adrian raised his weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once he crossed this line, there was no redemption, no pretending he was anything other than exactly what Victor had accused him of being: a killer, a monster, someone who solved problems with violence. But looking at Victor Kozlov, seeing the man who'd tried to sell his daughter, who'd threatened to hurt her to control Adrian, who'd built an empire on suffering and called it business, Adrian felt no hesitation. "This is for Lena," he said quietly. "For 8 years of freedom you tried to steal, for every choice you took from her, for every fear you planted in her heart." Victor's eyes widened with the realization that Adrian was actually going to do it. "Wait!" The shot took him center mass, clean and final. Victor collapsed, the light fading from his eyes before his body hit the floor. Adrian stood over the corpse of his enemy, his lover's father, the man whose death had just irrevocably changed everything. He should have felt triumph, relief, satisfaction. Instead, he felt empty. "It's done," Marcus said from the doorway. "All targets confirmed down. The warehouse is rigged to burn. We need to go." Adrian holstered his weapon and turned away from Victor's body, following Marcus through the warehouse toward the exit. Behind them, flames began to spread as incendiary devices triggered, consuming evidence and corpses in cleansing fire. They were in the car and 3 blocks away when the warehouse exploded, the blast visible in their rearview mirror. Adrian watched the fireball rise into the early morning sky, destroying the last physical evidence of Victor Kozlov's empire. "The others?" Adrian asked. "All dead or disappeared. Victor's organization is finished." Marcus navigated toward the safe house where Lena waited. "You pulled it off. Against all odds, you actually pulled it off." "At what cost?" Adrian stared at his hands, seeing blood that wasn't physically there but would never wash away. "At the cost of keeping her safe. That was the goal. You achieved it. By becoming exactly what she fears, a man who solves problems with murder. A man who protected someone he loves from a monster who would have destroyed her." Marcus's voice held firm conviction. "There's a difference." Adrian wanted to believe that, wanted to convince himself that Victor's death was justified, necessary, the only option available. But he'd made a promise to Lena: don't become him. Don't let hatred turn you into the same kind of man. And now, staring at his reflection in the car window, Adrian wasn't sure he'd kept that promise. The safe house appeared ahead, Marcus pulling into the underground garage with practiced efficiency. Adrian climbed out slowly, his body moving through familiar motions while his mind remained trapped in that warehouse, watching Victor fall, ending a life with the same casual precision he'd applied to business decisions. Lena met him at the door, her face pale with worry that transformed into relief when she saw he was unharmed. Then her eyes traveled to his expression, reading something there that made her go still. "What did you do?" she whispered. Adrian met her gaze, unable to lie, unwilling to pretend. "What I had to. Victor is dead. His organization is finished. You're free." The color drained completely from her face. "You killed him." "Yes." "My father. You killed my father." "Yes." Adrian wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort or explanation, but he remained frozen in the doorway. "I'm sorry." Lena stared at him for a long moment, emotions flickering across her face too quickly to identify. Then she turned and walked into the safe house, leaving Adrian standing alone with the weight of what he'd done. Marcus touched his shoulder briefly. "Give her time. She'll understand." But as Adrian followed Lena inside, watching her stand at the window with her arms wrapped around herself, he wasn't sure understanding was possible. He'd saved her life by taking her father's. Now he'd discover whether love could survive that kind of violence, or if he'd destroyed them both in the process of trying to protect what they'd found. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Lena remained at the window, her back to Adrian, her shoulders rigid with tension he couldn't read. He wanted to cross the room, to touch her, to explain in words that might make sense of the violence he'd committed in her name. But something in her posture warned him to keep his distance. "Say something," Adrian finally said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that felt dangerously like fear. "Yell at me. Hate me. Just don't stand there silent." "I don't know what to say." Lena's voice came out flat, emotionless. Part of me knew this was coming. The moment he called, the moment he threatened me. I knew you'd choose violence. It's who you are. It was the only way to keep you safe. Was it? She turned to face him, and Adrian saw tears streaming down her face despite her controlled tone. Or was it the easiest way? The most familiar? The path you'd take regardless because solving problems with death is what you know? The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's not fair. I tried everything else. I looked for alternatives, for strategies that didn't involve… Did you? Lena moved closer, her dark eyes blazing with grief and anger. Or did you decide from the moment he threatened me that he had to die? Be honest with me, Adrian. When did you make the choice? Before the meeting? After? Or was it always inevitable once you knew who I was? Adrian thought back through the timeline, the moment he'd learned she was Victor's daughter, the meeting where Victor had threatened her, the long night of planning with Marcus. At what point had he decided death was the only answer? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it was always inevitable. Maybe I'm exactly what you feared all along, a man who defaults to violence when challenged. At least you're being honest. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, that defensive posture he'd first seen on the terrace returning. He was a terrible man. A monster who hurt countless people, who tried to control me, who would have destroyed us both if given the chance. I know all of that. Intellectually, I understand why you did it. But, Adrian prompted when she didn't continue. But he was still my father, the man who used to read me bedtime stories and take me to the park before my mother died. The man I loved before I learned to fear him. Her voice broke. And you took away any chance I had of ever reconciling those two versions of him, of maybe, someday, finding closure or understanding or, I don't even know what. Just something more than this. The pain in her words cut deeper than any weapon. Adrian had been so focused on eliminating the threat, on protecting Lena from Victor's violence, that he hadn't considered what he was taking from her in the process. The possibility of confrontation, of speaking her truth to the man who'd shaped and damaged her, of choosing for herself how to handle her father's presence in her life. He'd made himself her protector without asking if that's what she wanted. I'm sorry, Adrian said, the words inadequate, but all he had. You're right. I took away your agency, your choice. I decided what was best for you without asking what you needed. Yes, you did. Lena moved to the couch, collapsing into it like her legs couldn't support her weight anymore. And now I have to live with the fact that the man I love killed my father. That every time I look at you, I'll remember what you're capable of. What you chose. Adrian sat carefully on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining distance while his entire being screamed to close it. What do you need from me? How do I fix this? You can't fix it. It's done. He's dead, and there's no undoing that. Lena stared at her hands, tears falling steadily now. What I need is time to process. To grieve for the father I lost twice, once when he became a monster, and again when you killed him. To figure out if I can separate loving you from hating what you did. And if you can't? The question terrified him more than any threat Victor had made. Then I guess we both learned to live with broken hearts. She finally looked at him, her eyes red but resolute. Because I meant what I said. I love you, but I don't know if love is enough to carry the weight of this. Adrian wanted to argue, to convince her that love was everything, that what they'd found was worth fighting for despite the violence that had protected it. But Lena deserved honesty, not pretty lies meant to ease his own fear. Okay, he said quietly. Take the time you need. I'll stay away, give you space to grieve and think. But Lana. He waited until she met his eyes. When you're ready, I'll be here. Whether that's tomorrow or next month or next year, I'll wait. You can't promise that. You don't know what the future holds. I know I won't want anyone else. I know what we have is real, even if it's complicated and damaged and built on a foundation of violence. Adrian risked moving slightly closer. I know I'd make the same choice again if it meant keeping you alive. And I know that probably makes me exactly the monster you're afraid I am, but it's the truth. Lena closed her eyes, fresh tears escaping. That's what scares me most. That you do it again. That violence will always be your first answer when someone threatens what you care about. It won't always be my first answer. Adrian chose his words carefully, needing her to understand. But it will always be an option I'm willing to consider. That's the reality of who I am and the world I inhabit. I can't change that, and I won't lie and pretend I can. Then maybe we're impossible. Maybe the best thing would be to walk away now before this gets any more complicated. Is that what you want? Lena opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. No, but wanting something and being able to sustain it are different things. Then let's find out which this is. Adrian extended his hand across the space between them, an invitation rather than a demand. Stay angry at me. Grieve your father. Process everything that happened. But don't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Give us a chance to see if we survive this. She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Then, slowly, she placed her palm in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but the contact anchored them both. I need you to promise me something, Lena said. Anything. If we do this, if we try to build something real from this mess, you have to let me make my own choices. No more protecting me by deciding things without my input. No more assuming you know what's best. Her grip tightened on his hand. I need to be your partner, not your possession. Can you do that? Adrian thought about his instinct to shield, to control, to manage every variable to ensure safety. Thought about how deeply embedded those patterns were, how fundamental to his survival they'd become. Letting Lena make her own choices, even dangerous ones, went against everything he'd built his life around, but losing her would destroy him more completely than any enemy ever could. I'll try, he said honestly. I can't promise I'll always succeed. My instinct will always be to protect you, sometimes in ways you didn't ask for, but I promise to try to respect your autonomy, to ask before deciding, to treat you as an equal partner rather than something fragile that needs protecting. That's all I'm asking. Effort, not perfection. Lena shifted closer, closing some of the distance between them. Because I know who you are, Adrian. I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm just asking you to remember that I survived 8 years without you, that I'm stronger than I look, that I can handle the truth even when it's ugly. I know you're strong. That's one of the first things I noticed about you. Then trust that strength. Trust me to make my own choices about risk and safety and what I'm willing to endure. She brought their joined hands to her chest, over her heart. Can you do that? I'll try, Adrian repeated. Every day, I'll try. They sat together in the quiet safe house, hands clasped, both processing the seismic shift their relationship had just survived. Outside, New York continued its relentless pace, unaware that Viktor Kozlov's empire had crumbled, that power had shifted, that two people were trying to build something genuine from the wreckage. What happens now? Lena asked finally. With Viktor's organization gone, with your empire intact, what comes next? Adrian had been asking himself the same question since pulling the trigger. The practical answer involved consolidating power, absorbing Viktor's territory, strengthening his position before other rivals moved to fill the vacuum. But looking at Lena's exhausted face, he realized the tactical answer wasn't what she needed to hear. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in my adult life, I genuinely don't know what happens next. That's terrifying. Also liberating. Adrian risked pulling her closer, relief flooding through him when she allowed it. I've spent so long planning every move, controlling every variable. Maybe it's time to just exist. See what happens without trying to orchestrate every outcome. Lena settled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. You'd hate that. You're a control freak. Probably, but I'd hate losing you more. He pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent that had become essential to him. So I'm willing to try uncertainty if it means keeping you in my life. We should talk about practical things, Lena said after a moment. Viktor's death will be investigated. There will be questions, suspicion. You need to prepare for that. Already done. The warehouse fire destroyed most evidence. My people have alibis prepared. The authorities will find a gang war, rival factions fighting for territory. Nothing that leads back to me directly. You've done this before. It wasn't a question. Not on this scale. But yes, I know how to obscure my involvement in violent events. Adrian felt her tense against him. Does that bother you? Knowing I'm practiced at covering up murder? Everything about this bothers me, Lena said quietly. But I'm trying to separate what bothers me philosophically from what I can actually live with in reality. Those aren't always the same thing. And what can you live with? She was quiet for so long, Adrian thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I can live with you being who you are, violent when necessary, strategic always, dangerous to your enemies. What I can't live with is being kept in the dark about it. If we're doing this, I need honesty, full transparency about your world, your choices, the risks we're both taking. Even when that honesty is ugly? Especially then, Lena pulled back to look at him. I'd rather know the ugly truth than live in pretty ignorance. At least truth gives me real choice about what I'm agreeing to. Adrian cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away the tear tracks on her cheeks. Okay. Complete honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it makes you question whether you should stay. And in return, I'll try not to run when things get difficult. I'll try to trust that you're capable of change, of growth, of being more than just the sum of your violent choices. Lena's hands came up to cover his. We're both going to have to try very hard at this, aren't we? Probably harder than either of us has tried at anything before. Adrian leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. But I think you're worth it. I think we're worth it. I hope you're right. They stayed like that for a long moment, drawing strength from proximity, from the simple fact that they'd survived the first real test of what existed between them. It wasn't perfect. Lena's grief was real, Adrian's guilt genuine, the complications far from resolved. But they were still there, still choosing each other, despite every rational reason to walk away. Marcus knocked softly on the door, then entered when Adrian called permission. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss next steps. The power vacuum is already creating problems. Give me 5 minutes, Adrian said. You need to handle this now. Other organizations are already moving on Victor's territory. If you don't claim it quickly, we'll have a genuine war on our hands. Marcus's expression was apologetic but firm. This can't wait. Lena stood before Adrian could respond. Go. Do what you need to do. I'll be here when you're done. You're sure? I'm sure that your world doesn't stop just because we're having relationship issues. Go prevent the war. We'll continue this conversation later. She managed a small smile. See? I'm already trying to trust that you'll come back. Adrian kissed her quickly, then followed Marcus into the adjacent room where maps and intelligence reports were spread across a table. The next several hours consumed him with exactly the kind of strategic maneuvering he excelled at. Phone calls to key players, promises of protection in exchange for loyalty, subtle threats to anyone considering opportunistic expansion into Victor's former territory. By early evening, Adrian had successfully claimed the majority of Victor's operations while appearing to cooperate with law enforcement's investigation into the warehouse fire. Several smaller organizations had pledged allegiance rather than face destruction. The transition of power happened so smoothly that most of the city didn't realize how close they'd come to genuine gang warfare. When he finally returned to the main room, exhausted but satisfied that the immediate crisis was contained, Adrian found Lena asleep on the couch. She'd clearly tried to wait up for him, but succumbed to emotional and physical exhaustion. He stood watching her for a moment, memorizing the peaceful vulnerability of her expression, the way her dark hair spread across the pillow. This woman had chosen him despite knowing what he was capable of, had looked directly at his violence and decided to stay anyway. The gift of that choice humbled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Adrian covered her with a blanket and settled into a nearby chair, content to watch over her sleep while his mind processed the last 48 hours. He'd killed a man, dismantled an empire, nearly lost the woman he loved, and somehow emerged with both his power and his relationship intact. The cost of that survival would haunt him: Victor's death, Lena's grief, the knowledge that he'd crossed lines he could never uncross. But looking at her peaceful face, Adrian couldn't bring himself to regret the choices that had kept her safe. Maybe that made him a monster. Or maybe it just made him human in all the complicated, contradictory ways that word implied. Lena stirred as dawn light began filtering through the windows. Her eyes opened slowly, finding Adrian still sitting watch. You didn't sleep. Couldn't? Too much adrenaline still working through my system. He moved to sit beside her on the couch. How are you feeling? Numb, sad, angry, relieved. She sat up, the blanket pooling in her lap. All of it at once, which is exhausting. That's understandable. You lost your father, even if he was already lost to you years ago. You're allowed to feel complicated things about that. I keep thinking about the last thing he said to me on the phone, that I'd always belonged to him, that I couldn't escape his blood. Lena's expression was troubled. Do you think he was right? That I'll always carry his violence with me, no matter how far I run? I think we're all shaped by where we come from, but we're not imprisoned by it. Adrian took her hand, threading their fingers together. You chose to leave, to build something different, to be someone other than what he wanted you to be. That choice matters more than blood. And you? Are you imprisoned by your past, by the violence that built your empire? I don't know yet. Adrian met her eyes honestly. I'm trying to figure out if I can be more than just the sum of my worst choices. If there's a version of me that exists beyond the empire and the strategy and the calculated cruelty, what would that version look like? I have no idea, but I'd like to find out. He raised their joined hands to his lips. With you, if you're willing to be part of that discovery. Lena studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing what he was offering against what she knew he was capable of. I need you to understand something. I can't be the thing that redeems you. I can't be the good influence that magically makes you less violent or more moral. That's not fair to either of us. I'm not asking you to redeem me. I'm just asking you to be present while I figure out who I am beyond what I've always been. Adrian paused, choosing his words carefully. I don't know if I can change fundamentally, but I think I can choose differently about how I apply what I am. Does that make sense? You mean using your strategic mind and your willingness to be ruthless for something other than building power? Exactly. There are causes worth fighting for, people worth protecting, systems worth dismantling that don't serve my empire but might serve something larger. Adrian realized he was articulating thoughts he'd never fully formed before. What if I stopped asking, how does this benefit me, and started asking, how does this benefit the people who can't protect themselves? That's a radical shift for someone who spent his whole life accumulating power. Probably impossible, but worth attempting maybe. He searched her face for reaction. What do you think? Is it naive to believe I could redirect what I am towards something better? Lena was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing patterns on the back of his hand. I think people are capable of surprising themselves. I think intentions matter, even when execution is imperfect. And I think if you're genuinely asking these questions, that's already a kind of change. But you're skeptical. I'm realistic. Change is hard. Sustained change is harder. And you're talking about fundamentally altering how you engage with the world while still maintaining the empire that requires exactly the ruthlessness you're questioning. Lena's expression was gentle but honest. That's not impossible, but it's definitely difficult. So what do we do? How do we move forward from here? Carefully, honestly, without pretending this is going to be easy or clean or anything other than messy and complicated. She shifted closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. We try. We fail sometimes. We keep trying anyway, and we promise to tell each other the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I can do that. Adrian covered her hand with his. What else do you need from me? Time. Space to grieve my father without feeling guilty about it. Permission to be angry at you sometimes for taking away my choice, even if I understand why you did it. Lena's voice wavered slightly. And patience while I figure out how to reconcile loving you with hating what you're capable of. You have all of that. All the time you need, all the space, all the patience I can manage. He pulled her closer, relief flooding through him when she allowed the contact. What you don't have is uncertainty about my commitment. I'm all in, Lena. Whatever this becomes, however difficult it gets, I'm choosing you. Even if choosing me means changing how you operate, giving up some of the power you've built? Even then. The answer came without hesitation because Adrian had already done the calculation. Power without Lena felt hollow. Success without her to share it with felt pointless. He'd spent so long building an empire that now seemed like an elaborate cage. Lena kissed him then, soft and tentative, like she was testing whether intimacy was still possible after everything that had happened. Adrian responded carefully, letting her control the pace, the depth, the meaning of the connection. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Lena rested her forehead against his. I'm not ready for more than this yet. The physical stuff, I mean. I need time before we can. I understand. We move at whatever pace you need. Adrian pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. This is enough. You, here, choosing to stay despite everything. That's more than I expected or probably deserve. You deserve a chance. Everyone deserves that. She pulled back to look at him seriously. But Adrian, if you ever lie to me about your world, about violence or danger or the choices you're making, we're done. I mean it. Complete honesty is the only way this works. Agreed. No lies, no omissions, no protecting you through ignorance. He met her eyes steadily. Even when the truth is ugly. Especially then. They spent the rest of the morning talking through practical matters. What Lena's life would look like now that Victor was gone. Whether she wanted to continue running her flower shop or needed distance from her old life. How public or private they should keep their relationship. Adrian promised to set up legitimate protection without smothering her independence, to respect her choices while still ensuring her safety. It was the kind of negotiation neither had expected to have. Two people trying to build something real while navigating the complicated reality of who they both were. By afternoon, Marcus returned with news that the police investigation into Victor's death was concluding exactly as Adrian had orchestrated. Gang violence, no clear perpetrator, insufficient evidence for charges. The case would remain open, but inactive, slowly fading into the background noise of New York's criminal landscape. You're clear, Marcus reported. Victor's organization has been absorbed or dispersed. No one's challenging your claim to his territory. As far as anyone can tell, you've emerged from this stronger than before. At what cost? Adrian asked quietly. Marcus glanced at Lena, understanding the question's layers. That's not for me to judge. You made the choice you thought you had to make. Now you live with it. Helpful as always, Adrian said dryly. I'm your enforcer, not your therapist. But Marcus's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, you did keep her safe. That was the goal. You achieved it. After Marcus left, Lena stood at the window overlooking the city, her expression contemplative. What happens to Victor's people now? The ones who worked for him, depended on him for income? Some will find work with other organizations. Some will leave the life entirely. A few might try to rebuild something independent. Adrian joined her at the window. Why? Because I'm trying to understand the full scope of what his death means. How many lives were affected? How the ecosystem shifts when someone like him is removed? Lena turned to face him. Does it make things better or just different? Probably just different. Someone will always fill the vacuum. Power doesn't disappear, it just changes hands. Adrian considered the question seriously. But maybe the someone who fills it can choose to do things less brutally, to build something that doesn't require quite as much suffering. Is that someone you? I don't know yet, but I'd like the chance to find out. He took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar between them. With your help, maybe I can figure out what responsible power looks like instead of just ruthless power. That's a lot of responsibility to put on me. Not on you. With you. As a partner, not a savior. Adrian squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking you to witness me trying to fix myself. There's a difference. Lena nodded slowly, seeming to accept the distinction. Okay, but we do this in stages, small changes first, then larger ones as we see what works. No dramatic transformations that aren't sustainable. Agreed. What's the first stage? She thought for a moment, her gaze returning to the city spread below them. Your flower shop contract. The hotel still owes me for last month's arrangements. Use your connections to make sure they pay fairly and on time. Small, concrete, doesn't hurt your reputation. Adrian smiled at the practical specificity of the request. Done. What else? There's a women's shelter in my neighborhood that's constantly struggling for funding. They help women escape domestic violence, rebuild their lives. Victor used to donate to them, money he'd made from trafficking and exploitation, buying legitimacy with blood money. Lena's expression hardened with old anger. Set up a legitimate fund for them. Real money, clean money, no strings attached. Consider it done. Adrian was already mentally calculating how much he could allocate without drawing attention. Anything else? Not right now. Let's start with those two things and see how it feels. See if you can exercise power in ways that help instead of hurt. She turned to face him fully. And if you can, maybe we build from there. Add more projects, more ways of redirecting what you are toward what could be. You're giving me homework. I'm giving you a path forward that doesn't require you to stop being who you fundamentally are. Lena's smile was small but genuine. You're strategic, ruthless when necessary, good at manipulating systems to achieve goals. Those skills don't have to serve only destruction. They could serve something better. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her close while his mind raced with possibilities he'd never considered before. What if power could be wielded for protection instead of just accumulation? What if his strategic mind could dismantle systems of exploitation instead of just building his own empire? It was naive, probably impossible, almost certainly doomed to fail in various ways. But looking at Lena's hopeful expression, Adrian found himself wanting to try anyway. Okay, he said quietly. We try it your way. Small steps toward something better. No promises of complete transformation, just genuine effort toward change. That's all I'm asking, Lena kissed him softly. Genuine effort and complete honesty. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm between them. Lena returned to her flower shop, resuming the life she'd built with new security measures Adrian insisted on, but implemented subtly enough not to smother her independence. Adrian continued managing his empire, but began the delicate process of transitioning some operations toward legitimate business while maintaining enough of the infrastructure that kept him powerful. The hotel paid Lena's invoice in full within 24 hours of Adrian's call. The women's shelter received an anonymous donation large enough to fund operations for 2 years. Small victories that didn't fundamentally alter the landscape, but shifted it incrementally towards something less predatory. They had dinner together 3 nights a week, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at restaurants where Adrian could be seen in public with her, gradually normalizing their relationship in the eyes of those who watched such things. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and preferences, building intimacy through accumulated small moments rather than grand gestures. And slowly, carefully, Lena began to trust that Adrian could be more than just the man who'd killed her father, that he was capable of growth, of change, of choosing restraint over violence when the situation allowed it. 2 months after Victor's death, Adrian brought Lena to a property he'd acquired in upstate New York, a small estate surrounded by acres of undeveloped land, far enough from the city to feel like sanctuary, but close enough to access when necessary. "What is this place?" Lena asked as they walked through rooms filled with afternoon sunlight. "A possibility." Adrian watched her explore, noting how she gravitated toward the windows overlooking gardens that had gone wild without maintenance. "I thought maybe we could do something with it. Turn it into something meaningful instead of just another property I own and never use." "Like what?" "I was thinking a residential program. For women leaving situations like you left, controlling families, forced marriages, domestic violence. A place they could stay while rebuilding their lives, learning skills, finding independence." Adrian moved to stand beside her at the window. "We could fund it through legitimate channels, staff it with professionals, make it actually helpful instead of just performative charity." Lena turned to stare at him, surprise and something that might have been hope lighting her expression. "You're serious?" "Completely. I have the resources. You have the vision and understanding of what's actually needed. Together we could build something that matters." He took her hand, nervous in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "What do you think?" "I think," Lena's voice broke slightly, "I think that's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever offered me. Not flowers or jewelry or pretty words, but the chance to transform pain into purpose." "So is that a yes?" "That's an absolutely enthusiastically yes." She threw her arms around him, laughing and crying simultaneously. "When do we start?" "Whenever you're ready." Adrian held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling something fundamental shift in his chest. "We'll need to hire staff, renovate the facilities, establish protocols. It'll take months to get operational." Then we start planning now. Lena pulled back, her eyes bright with excitement that transformed her entire face. I'll research best practices, talk to people who run similar programs. You handle the legal structures and funding. We build this together. Over the following months, the project consumed them both in the best possible way. Lena discovered she had a gift for program development, for understanding the practical and emotional needs of women rebuilding their lives. Adrian found that applying his strategic mind to construction timelines and staff recruitment was surprisingly satisfying when the end goal was helping people rather than just accumulating power. They argued sometimes about implementation details, Adrian's instinct toward tight control conflicting with Lena's emphasis on giving residents autonomy. But they learned to negotiate, to compromise, to trust each other's expertise in different areas. The first residents moved into what they'd named Wildflower House 6 months after Victor's death. 12 women ranging in age from 19 to 54, all escaping situations of control or violence, all seeking the kind of freedom Lena had fought for at 18. Adrian stood with Lena at the dedication ceremony, watching her speak to the gathered residents and staff about second chances and the strength it takes to choose differently. She glowed with purpose, with the satisfaction of creating something meaningful from the wreckage of her past. "You did this," Adrian said quietly when she returned to his side. "We did this." Lena laced her fingers through his. "You provided the resources and structure. I provided the vision and understanding. Neither of us could have done it alone. Partnership. Real partnership. Equal partnership." She squeezed his hand. "Exactly what I asked for all those months ago." That night, back in Adrian's penthouse that had slowly accumulated signs of Lena's presence, her books on the shelves, her plants on the windowsills, her laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. They made love for the first time since Victor's death. It was different from that first reckless night, slower and more intentional, weighted with everything they'd survived and chosen and built together. Afterward, Lena lay with her head on Adrian's chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns over his heart. "I forgive you," she said quietly, "for my father, for making that choice without me, for all of it." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "I don't know if I forgive myself." "That's okay. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about choosing not to let it define everything that comes after." She pressed a kiss over his heart. "You killed him to protect me. That's true. It's also true that you've spent every day since then trying to be more than just that choice. Both things can exist simultaneously. How did you get so wise?" "Years of therapy after leaving him. Highly recommend it, by the way. You should consider talking to someone about the violence in your past." Adrian laughed despite the serious suggestion. "You want me to go to therapy? I want you to have someone to process things with beyond just me. Someone objective who can help you navigate the complicated relationship between who you've been and who you want to become." Lena propped herself up to look at him. "That's a lot of emotional labor. It shouldn't all fall on me." "Fair point." Adrian considered the idea, surprised to find he wasn't completely opposed. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Consideration, not immediate agreement." They fell asleep tangled together, both more at peace than they'd been in months. The journey wasn't over. They'd continue navigating the complicated reality of building something good from violent foundations, continue failing and adjusting and trying again. But they were doing it together, with honesty and effort, and the kind of messy, imperfect love that survived because both people chose it daily. A year after Victor's death, Wildflower House had expanded to accommodate 20 residents with a waiting list of women seeking admission. Lena had quit her flower shop to run the program full-time, discovering she was brilliant at administration and advocacy. Adrian had quietly divested from several of his more exploitative operations, redirecting resources toward legitimate businesses that employed people fairly instead of extracting maximum profit through minimum ethics. He still maintained enough power to protect what mattered, still operated in morally gray areas when necessary. But the balance had shifted. Violence became the last resort instead of the first option. Strategic thinking applied to building sustainable systems instead of just accumulating control. Marcus remained his most trusted enforcer, but even their relationship had evolved. Where before they discussed only tactics and threats, Now they sometimes talked about Marcus's brother Thomas, who'd successfully maintained his double agent role long enough to prove his loyalty had been reclaimed. About whether redemption was possible for people who'd done terrible things, about what it meant to choose differently without pretending the past could be erased. On the anniversary of Victor's death, Lena brought Adrian to the cemetery where her father had been buried. They stood together at the grave, not speaking, just acknowledging the complicated legacy of the man who'd shaped them both. "I don't forgive him," Lena said finally, "for what he did to my mother, to me, to countless others. But I'm grateful for what opposing him taught me about my own strength." "Do you wish I'd found another way?" Adrian asked the question that had haunted him for a year. "A solution that didn't require his death?" "Sometimes, when I'm tired or sad or missing the father he was before he became a monster." Lena turned to face Adrian fully. "But then I remember that he gave you an impossible choice. Submit completely or watch me suffer. And you chose to protect me the only way the situation allowed. I can live with that, even if it's complicated. I'm sorry you have to. I'm sorry he made it necessary." She took Adrian's hand, leading him away from the grave toward the car. "But I'm not sorry for what we've built from the aftermath. Wildflower House, our partnership, this messy, imperfect love that somehow works despite everything. That's ours, Adrian. We created that." They drove back to the city in comfortable silence, hands clasped on the console between them. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the skyline in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. "I love you," Adrian said as they crossed the bridge into the city. "I know I don't say it often enough, so I'm saying it now. I love you for staying when you had every reason to leave, for believing I could be more than my worst choices, for building something meaningful with me when you could have chosen safety over complication. I love you too." Lena brought their joined hands to her lips. "For trying to change even when it's difficult. For respecting my autonomy even when your instinct is to protect through control. For being honest about who you are instead of pretending to be someone you're not. We're quite the pair, aren't we? The crime boss trying to be less ruthless, and the florist who fell in love with him despite knowing better. The crime boss who's building a residential program for domestic violence survivors," Lena corrected, "and the florist who discovered she's actually brilliant at nonprofit management. We're more than just our origins." "Yes, we are." That night, they hosted dinner at Adrian's penthouse for the core team from Wildflower House, staff members who'd helped transform the vision into reality, residents who'd graduated the program and were building independent lives. The apartment that had once been sterile and empty filled with laughter and conversation, with the kind of genuine warmth Adrian had never imagined possible in his carefully controlled world. Watching Lena move through the gathering, speaking with residents about their progress, celebrating their victories, offering encouragement for their struggles, Adrian felt something he'd never allowed himself before: hope. Not the calculated optimism that came from strategic advantage, but genuine hope that maybe, possibly, he could be more than just the man who'd killed to protect what he loved. That maybe the violence in his past could coexist with the good he was trying to build in his present. That maybe love and ruthlessness weren't mutually exclusive, just complicated bedfellows that required constant negotiation. Lena caught his eye from across the room, her smile radiant and real, and Adrian knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with the kind of partnership that survived because both people chose it daily. He'd started as a man who controlled through power, who solved problems with calculated violence, who trusted no one and needed nothing beyond his empire. Lena had transformed him into someone capable of vulnerability, of change, of choosing restraint over ruthlessness when the situation allowed it. She hadn't redeemed him. Redemption wasn't something another person could grant, but she'd witnessed him trying to redeem himself, and her faith in that possibility had made the effort seem worthwhile. As the evening wound down and guests departed with promises to reconvene soon, Adrian and Lena stood together at the windows overlooking the city, the same view he'd stared at countless times before, but now transformed by everything they'd built together. "Happy?" Lena asked, leaning into his embrace. "More than I ever expected to be." Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not running. for giving me a chance to be more than my worst moment, for believing that love could survive violence if we worked hard enough at it. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face gently. For choosing me, even when choosing me was the most reckless thing you could have done. Choosing you was the best reckless choice I ever made. Lena rose on her toes to kiss him, and I'd make it again, every single time. They made love that night with the city lights painting shadows across their skin, both of them acutely aware of how close they'd come to losing this, how easily it could have ended differently. But it hadn't. They'd survived Victor's threats, Adrian's violence, Lena's grief, and the complicated reality of building something genuine from damaged foundations. In the morning, they'd return to Wildflower House, to the residents who needed support, and the staff who needed guidance. Adrian would attend to the empire that still required his strategic attention, making choices that balanced power with increasing ethics. Lena would continue transforming pain into purpose, proving daily that escape was possible for anyone brave enough to choose it. But for now, in this moment, they were just two people who'd found each other in a room full of performance and decided to risk everything on something real. Who'd survived violence and grief and impossible choices to build a love that wasn't perfect but was wholly, completely theirs. The night that wasn't meant to matter had become everything. The reckless choice that should have been forgotten had transformed both their lives. And the love they'd built from blood and flowers, from restraint and ruthlessness, from honesty and effort. That love had survived because they'd chosen it daily, imperfectly, with full knowledge of the cost. Adrian held Lena as she drifted to sleep, her breathing evening out, her trust in him absolute despite everything she knew he was capable of. He'd spend the rest of his life earning that trust, trying to be worthy of the chance she'd given him, choosing to be more than just his worst choices. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But with Lena beside him, Adrian believed it was possible. And sometimes belief was enough to make impossible things real.